to the crime legally, but not admitting to it. That's a coward move on the part of Kevin Gross. On September 11, 2012, Kevin Gross is sentenced to 45 years in prison.
But it's crazy how this all unfolded.
You know, all I can think about when I go back to this case, as unbelievable as it was the truth.
The brothers got their cousins who hail from D.C. Hey.
I mean, sometimes murders don't...
When I think of Scooter, I think of a sweet, small, thin kid. But when he hit the stage and that light hit him, he was a totally different animal. It was something in his eyes. It was almost like it was past hunger. I think that's what hurt so much when it happened later.
I remember them dragging him out the car, and he had like blood coming out his mouth. And I was just screaming, screaming, screaming.
Police here in Baltimore are used to acts of retaliation. This was payback on a whole nother level.
There was a bloody tennis match going back and forth throughout the city.
How many people you gonna hurt? How many people gotta suffer for it to end?
The saying is, if you're going to seek revenge, make sure you dig 2 graves.
June 25th, 2016. At 6:57 p.m., police in Baltimore, Maryland respond to an emergency call near Morgan State University.
We received a phone call from our dispatcher notifying that a shooting had taken place at Harford Road and Moravia Road. We responded out to the location. When we got out there were people everywhere.
The crowd is gathered around a gray Honda that has crashed into a liquor store. Onlookers say the vehicle careened off the road after it was shot at by an unidentified gunman.
The driver's side was literally riddled with bullets. There were a number of bullets struck into the car, into the roof, out the other side. Speaking with the primary officer, they gave me a breakdown about what took place. An adult male had been shot. An adult male was subsequently transported to Johns Hopkins Hospital.
The victim is 23-year-old rapper Tyrese Watson, better known to his fans by his stage name.
Someone came up to me and said that this is Scooter. At that time, I had no idea who Scooter was.
Tyrese Trayvon Watson was born on April 13th, 1993. He grew up near Pennsylvania Avenue in West Baltimore, a neighborhood with strong ties to black music history.
Years ago, I'm talking like the 60s, 70s, you had the biggest names come to do concerts on Pennsylvania Avenue. Frank Sinatra, Commodores. This is where everything took place. Because of the influx of drugs that have infiltrated the community, there has been a fall off.
Young Tyrese's single mother did her best to provide for the family. But growing up poor in a rough part of town was never easy. To escape his surroundings, Tyrese turned to rap music, adopting the stage name Lil Scooter at an early age.
His mother attested to the fact that he would have his headphones on constantly, and he would constantly be writing his lyrics in his notebooks and really living in that space.
He cared a lot about his mother. He put that in his music as well. He wanted the world to know what he's been through, the struggles, you know, him and his mother had, and that his ultimate goal was to help her get in a better situation.
Scooter's rise to stardom would hit a speed bump when, as a teenager, he dropped out of high school and started making poor choices. In 2011, at age 17, he was arrested for drug possession. But this turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
Scooter was placed into a program called the Violence Prevention Initiative, or VPI. That helped guide him away from the continued course. He really took hold of more of the rap music than being involved in drugs.
I think he took up pretty quickly as it pertains to Baltimore. We're a hard town. Like, you know, they always say you can make it here. No, seriously. If you can make it in Baltimore, you have really done it.
The community truly embraced Lil Scooter because they felt he was real. He didn't rap about what he heard someone else talk about. He didn't rap about what he thought would resonate with the people in his community. He rapped about what he lived.
In 2014, Scooter's song Bird Flu became the unofficial anthem of Baltimore's West Side.
While it has various meanings, our sports teams, the Orioles and the Ravens, are both birds. So there plays on that as well. So it galvanizes people around it from that aspect.
Everybody here, everybody in the state of Maryland believed in this kid. You had athletes dancing to it. You had Diddy shouting him out. You had Meek Mill shouting him out. It was like something the city never seen before.
His success landed him in a prominent Baltimore rap collective.
They were very supportive of Scooter, very supportive of his career. They did everything they need to do to make him that superstar.
Scooter's personal life was thriving as well. In 2015, he started dating fellow West Baltimore musician Taylor Johnson, also known as Sneaky T.
West Baltimore is known for young, fly, and flashy. West Baltimore is like where the fly guys at, where the fly girls at. Getting money guys, getting money girls. So we were kind of always like popular in the city. Both had a name, we had mutual friends, so it kind of just happened. Scooter is a very caring person, demanding. he was a little demanding, but he was a man. Like, he would get stuff done.
He was really laid back and chill. But when he hit the stage and that light hit him, he was a totally different animal. You could tell that he was in his element. Let's say that.
Scooter and Sneaky T even performed together once.
So we had a booking together, and it was so fun. Just imagine you and your significant other are in the same field. Y'all both getting paid to do what y'all like to do, getting big money to do what you like to do. Y'all both coming home with a bag. Y'all both had, like, it was just, that was a great night.
As his reputation grew, Scooter began using his platform to spread a message of nonviolence.
He was one of the few people that you can actually see making it to the next level. I think Scooter was going to perpetuate that positive attitude and give everybody hope.
You know, he took his craft very seriously, spent a lot of time in the studio, and now he's going to peace rallies, trying to get back to the community, trying to tell kids that are coming behind him, you don't have to go that route.
On June 25th, 2016, the day of the shooting, he was embraced by community leaders as a role model and symbol of Baltimore's future.
Stokey Canada, he organized a peace rally held at Morgan State University, a very prominent HBCU right here in Baltimore, Maryland. And Lil Scooter was in attendance. He and his girlfriend, he was actually a featured artist, a featured guest at this particular rally.
I felt like a part of my life, I made a lot of poor decisions, and I did things that I'm not or wasn't proud of at the time in my life, and I wanted to give people hope that change was possible. So I wanted to have a basketball game to use these influencers like Scooter to give young fans who wanted to see them do something other than what they normally do. Scooter wasn't a basketball player, but you can tell he was having fun.
For everyone involved, it was a major success. But less than an hour after the rally ended, tragedy struck.
I just remember, being happy that we had another successful event. And then I remember getting a call leaving the gym that Scooter got shot.
As Scooter is rushed to the hospital, Baltimore police began questioning potential witnesses. One of them immediately stands out.
My attention was really put toward a woman that was crying, very distraught, on the side of the road. Come to find out that that was Taylor Johnson, the girlfriend of Little Scooter.
Taylor says she was in the passenger seat when the vehicle crashed, but is too traumatized to remember exactly what happened.
When the police officer got there, I remember him saying, "What's your name? What's your address? What's your date of birth?" And I was like, "I don't know. I literally did not know. I couldn't tell him nothing." He was like, "Well, can you call somebody? Do you know a number?" And I remember grabbing my phone and dialing. I was calling everybody that was close to me, like, "Come right here."
As friends and family race to the scene, the detective receives devastating news.
He is rushed to the hospital, but despite doctors' greatest efforts, he dies from his injuries.
Casey, welcome to the U.S. Marshals.
Try to keep up. It picked hell of a day to leave the ranch.
All my love scattered everywhere.
When he looked at me, I just melted.
Dreams so sweet turned into a nightmare.
I didn't suspect that he was a straight out killer demon. I knew I was in trouble. That's a hell of a price to pay. Just for one damn man.
Baltimore police are investigating the death of rapper Lil Scooter, shot by an unknown gunman on his way home from a peace rally.
We had about 11 shell casings that were located in the intersection, were right at the light. The caliber of gun we discovered was a .40 caliber handgun. There were no shell casings in the vehicle, which leads us to understand that the shooters were clearly on the outside of the vehicle. All the shots were coming in from the driver's side into the vehicle.
His girlfriend, who was sitting right next to him in the passenger seat, left the scene physically unscathed.
I believe in God, and there was nothing but God watching over her during that time. There were bullet holes literally right over top of her head, where her head would have been. Had she had moved any other direction, she would have been killed also.
It seems clear Scooter was targeted. The question is why?
It's a major intersection. There's surveillance cameras in that intersection. And I remember them getting me the surveillance video rather quickly.
We were able to get video footage of Scooter and Sneaky T walking out of Morgan State University, going toward that car. Shortly thereafter, the Nissan Quest following them as they were traveling down Cold Spring Lane, which turns in to Moravia Road. We're able to see the Nissan Quest do an illegal U-turn in the middle of the street and break fast going after them, going in that direction.
But the individual who got out to do the shooting couldn't make out that person very well from it. He saw the Nissan Quest just after the shooting had taken place, coming into the parking lot, backing out, and then fleeing in the opposite direction.
Still recovering from shock, Scooter's girlfriend, Sneaky T, sits down with police.
It was very hot that day. Well, I remember me getting dressed at home. I had a show that day too. He didn't have a show. I had a show. So we was like, we're gonna go to the rally and then chill later until your show. We get to the game and me and my friend go sit in the bleachers. We were just chilling, playing on our phone, taking pictures. They, playing basketball. Nothing weird. It was just a normal day.
When the game ended, Taylor says she and Scooter got back in the car to drive home. but they weren't familiar with the area.
I'm from South and West, and he's from West, so we really didn't have a real good sense of direction of where we were going. We used the GPS to get to the game. So we were leaving the game. I feel like I was typing in an address in my GPS or something. I remember hearing something loud, like a firework. And we both kind of like ducked, like, you know, like when you hear something loud, like, what was that?
She ducked down, tried to get as small as she could in the vehicle. Thank God she did.
And I heard another one. And they kept coming. It's like, pop, 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 pop. The first shot, it was like a pop, like a pause with it or something. And then the shots kept going. So I just grabbed the door and just jumped out the car. As I got out the car, I was walking backwards. And I could see the shooter had like something white right over his face. But you could tell that he never looked at me when I got out the car. Like never turned or like pointed the gun to me. Like he was determined, like he wanted Scooter. Like he knew what he wanted. And I remember walking like backwards, like crying, like walking backwards, but he was still shooting. Like he didn't stop, like he was still shooting. And then he ran. I knew Scooter was dead because the car started drifting. He couldn't hit the brake. I remember the car crashing and me just like falling to the ground crying. I remember people outside saying like, that's Sneaky T, that's Sneaky T. And I was just screaming, screaming, screaming. And then the police and the ambulance came. I just sat there and just looked at the car and was screaming until the police came. And I remember them dragging him out the car and he had like blood coming out his mouth. And he had blood coming out his mouth, and I was just crying. I was like, is he gonna live? Is he gonna live? Asking the officers, like, is he gonna live? Is he gonna live? And they said, we just gonna get him to the hospital. I heard him get to the hospital. We gonna see. I just knew it wasn't good.
Unfortunately, Sneaky T has no idea who the shooter was or why he went after Scooter. But the news quickly spreads, and the community, often at odds with police, bands together to help find Scooter's killer.
The streets are talking, and we need those streets to talk to us. That's the thing about Baltimore. The people are resilient and always willing to give you another chance. And they rallied around this particular murder because he was relatable, and they saw him as somebody who had survived the odds and was doing the right thing. I think it was just this, we can't believe it. And who would do this?
Right away, the Baltimore police receive a record-breaking number of tips.
Scooter's murder woke the city up.
I had seen more than 300 plus murders in that year, basically. And all the murders that had taken place, I had never seen the abundance of tips that we had in this particular case.
The tips that were coming in ranged from who possibly had set him up to listen to the lyrics of this person rapping.
They wanted to provide things like links to different social media, links to other rappers who had song lyrics that could target Lil Scooter.
A lot of times in the hip hop game, and we've seen this for years. I mean, I grew up with East Coast, West Coast, Biggie, Tupac. You know, lyrics can sometimes get a little rough. And if one group thinks they're being played by another group, sometimes it doesn't stick with just being in the studio sometimes things pour out to the streets.
All right, so that's one pair of glasses.
Yep.
With prescription lenses, plus anti-reflective lens coating.
Oh.
Scratch-resistant coating.
Did I choose?
UV protection. Award-winning customer service.
That's me.
That's also me. Free returns, free exchanges, and free frame adjustments for life.
And how much more is that?
Oh, it's all included at Warby Parker.
So my glasses
Are still just $95.
Oh.
Surprise! I just get excited.
Your glasses can change the way you see the world. They can be bold, polished, complex, or unexpected. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker. Or maybe your perspective is artful, simple, sharp, and classic. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker, starting at $95, including prescription lenses.
All my love scattered everywhere.
When he looked at me, I just melted.
Dreams so sweet turned into a nightmare.
But I didn't suspect that he was a straight-out killer demon. I knew I was in trouble. That's a hell of a price to pay. Just for one damn man.
Scooter's death left a gaping hole in the hearts of many Baltimoreans. And that was incredibly evident by the number of people calling into the hotline with tips.
They were young people who didn't necessarily want to physically talk to another human or detective. They just wanted to provide things like links to different social media. Look at this person. This is the person that did it. We established something very simplistic to make that direct line much easier for people to communicate.
In the days following the shooting of Baltimore rapper Lil Scooter, investigators sift through hundreds of tips from the community. Most are dead ends. But a confidential informant working for police provides them with a name.
The informant reached out to their handlers and immediately told them exactly who was responsible for the shooting. Cortez Mitchell.
Cortez Mitchell is a 22-year-old resident of Glen Burnie, Maryland, a suburb of Baltimore.
Our informant was able to tell us right away that not only did Cortez Mitchell shoot and kill Scooter, he told him where the gun was. It was from there that a search warrant was executed and the gun was located exactly where Cortez Mitchell had advised the informant where it was going to be.
Detectives only have the informant's word that the gun belonged to Mitchell and was the one used to kill Scooter.
Just because an informant says something, we don't go and lock someone up right away. We still have to do an investigation.
You want to send that gun to the lab. You want to match up ballistics. You want to get DNA or fingerprints. Unfortunately, some of these things take time, even if you get it rushed. This is a city now that is on pace for 1,000 shootings and murders every year. 1,000. So that's how much evidence is backlogged. That's how much evidence is being processed on a regular basis.
From this point in time, we want to look into Cortez Mitchell, get all of his background, learn about Cortez Mitchell.
While investigators wait for lab results, they talk to everyone they can find with information about Mitchell and any possible motive he might have had for killing Scooter. They soon discover Mitchell belongs to a different Baltimore rap crew than the one Scooter was in.
Different groups, not necessarily rivals, just different. But once we saw that, we say, okay, this makes sense.
According to court records, the two groups have not always gotten along.
Don't ask me why, just is what it is. Very small, tight-knit communities that stick together. I don't want to portray it as a gang situation. I refuse to do that. It's not that. But there's a lot of stuff that can go along with this.
Scooter rep his crew till literally the day he died. He loved his guys and he loved his crew.
I met him at a time when he was trying to be the next great artist in Baltimore, you know, and that's all we talked about was him, you know, being successful in making music. And he had a lot of respect for his team. I mean, to my knowledge, he was loyal to a cause that he thought would change his life and the guys around him. And they was hopeful that Scooter could take the brand to that level, you know, the upper echelon, you know what I'm saying, you know, the higher tier premium brand, you know, when you think about these rap labels, you know, that have been successful over the years, they wanted to be that next brand.
Some wonder if Cortez Mitchell was the shooter. Is it possible he gunned Scooter down because of some perceived tension between his crew and Scooter's? Did Cortez Mitchell just want payback?
Casey, welcome to the U.S. Marshals.
Try to keep up. It picked hell of a day to leave the ranch.
All my love scattered everywhere.
When he looked at me, I just melted.
Dreams so sweet turned into a nightmare.
But I didn't suspect that he was a straight-out killer demon. I knew I was in trouble. That's a hell of a price to pay. Just for one damn man.
Early in their investigation, Baltimore police have identified 22-year-old Cortez Mitchell as a potential suspect in the murder of local rap star Lord Scooter. Since the two men belong to different crews, detectives believe it's possible Scooter was killed to exact revenge. But what would have motivated Mitchell?
A lot of times, associates might do something that might lead to the person being killed. We were looking for other shootings that may have taken place and see if there was any connections with Scooter's case. That's when we found out about the Devontae Robinson case.
Police reports show that 24-year-old Devontae Robinson was shot in West Baltimore at approximately 1 p.m. on June 25th, only a few hours before Scooter was killed.
Now, according to witnesses of that shooting, Robinson was walking on the street when another man opened fire from a black SUV. Despite being shot 3 times, Robinson survived.
What we come to find out is that Devontae was loosely associated with the rap group of Cortez Mitchell.
Although Robinson's shooter wasn't identified, detectives theorize Mitchell might have believed someone in Scooter's crew was responsible. If one of Scooter's associates shot Robinson, it might explain why Scooter was killed.
Who was his homeboy? That's one of the things that we look for. Like, who's your main man? Who's your ride or die that's going to be with you everywhere you go?
The person who best fits that description is 23-year-old Fred Catchings, a West Baltimore native and Scooter's childhood friend.
Catchings happens to be a close friend of Lil Scooter.
Had Catchings shot Devontae Robinson? Police learned Catchings was at Scooter's side in the hours before Scooter was killed.
What we come to find out is that Scooter was with Fred Catchings at the basketball game.
Catchings ended up leaving the game prior to Sneaky T and Scooter. And given the violence that followed, it's possible he was trying to avoid being ambushed by someone seeking revenge for Robinson's shooting. Instead, he might have gotten his friend killed. As investigators begin the search for Fred Catchings, countless mourners gather to lay Scooter to rest.
Everybody was there. I mean, he had a line all the way down the street. It was beautiful. He looked like he was there asleep, but it was just hurtful, you know, to see a young brother landing like that. It was just unbelievable this kid was gone.
Authorities hope that anyone who feels loyal to Scooter will choose to follow Scooter's path of nonviolence and not continue a cycle of payback.
There was this energy in that space where it was like these individuals were now carrying the torch. That Scooter had done as much as he could while on earth in his short 23 years of living, and now it was incumbent upon them to take up that mantle. You know, don't let this derail you. Don't let this take you off your mark. Stay in the trenches and let's finish the work that Scooter was doing his best to do in his beloved city.
5 days later, the community is dealt another blow.
Scooter's manager, Trayvon Lee, is gunned down. And he dies from 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, just steps away from his home.
Some wonder if Lee's murder was another attempt at avenging the shooting of Devontae Robinson. That same day, 3 more young men are ambushed by another unidentified shooter. It is unclear whether the shootings are related, but the violence in Baltimore is clearly escalating.
Police here in Baltimore are used to acts of retaliation. But what they learned with this case is that this was payback on a whole nother level.
The trail of violence begins to go back and forth. It was a bloody tennis match going back and forth throughout the city.
This city is definitely an eye for an eye. If you do something to somebody, your family member, somebody is going to get you back.
Desperate to stop the violence, Baltimore police hold a press conference on July 7th.
You can't allow street justice to take place because it's only leaving family without their loved one.
A lot of people sit here and think, oh, you cut me, I cut you. You shoot me, I shoot you. But where do it end? How many people you gonna hurt? How many people gotta suffer for it to end?
Just so you know, supper around here can be kind of an event.
A event?
You just have to see it to believe it.
Is this your life all the time?
It's like one big tragic cartoon.
We have lived a fairly blessed life, but we have lost our center as a family. What is your plan? Work on myself? We need to let her fall down. What are your dreams?
I haven't gotten that far.
The worry is what you do next.
We have never been challenged. This would be a challenge.
Your glasses can change the way you see the world. They can be bold, polished, complex, or unexpected. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker. Or maybe your perspective is artful, simple, sharp, and classic. Find your perfect pair at Warby Parker, starting at $95, including prescription lenses.
All right, so that's one pair of glasses.
Yep.
With prescription lenses, plus anti-reflective lens coating.
Oh.
Scratch-resistant coating.
Did I choose?
UV protection. Award-winning customer service.
That's me.
That's also me. Free returns, free exchanges, and free frame adjustments for life.
And how much more is that?
Oh, it's all included at Warby Parker.
So my glasses
Are still just $95.
Oh.
Surprise! I just get excited.
This payback mentality is killing off so much talent. And you're taking food out of kids' mouths, because now this parent is gone. They supplied food for all these families. It makes no sense to me.
It's sickening. It's heartbreaking. Everyone wants to get the last word. They don't want the police to be involved in it. They're going to handle it themselves.
It's a disease that has to be stopped.
After the murder of Baltimore rapper Lord Scooter, the city suffers an escalation of gun violence. And investigators are doing everything they can to put a stop to it. So far, they've been unable to locate the man suspected of instigating the cycle of violence with an earlier shooting, Scooter's friend, Fred Catchings. But on July 8th, police catch a break when he's pulled over during a traffic stop.
During that car stop, a gun is recovered. Catchings is placed under arrest, and that gun is linked to the shooting of Devontae Robinson, which took place just hours before and shooting the murder of Scooter. Fred was brought into our homicide office. I stepped in on the interview at that time, going back and forth. Fred began to open up about what took place with Devontae Robinson.
When confronted with the ballistics evidence and surveillance video, Catchings admits to shooting Robinson. He says he believed that Robinson was hired to shoot him, so he wanted to shoot him first.
This was the catalyst to everything taking place afterwards. Fred Catchings just shoots Devontae Robinson.
Allegedly, the man sent to kill Scooter was Robinson's friend, Cortez Mitchell.
Fred Catchings says that while Devontae Robinson was in the hospital recovering from the initial shooting, his friend Cortez Mitchell hit the street looking for revenge. Retaliation needed to be felt. When they found out Scooter was at a public event that day, the peace rally, they wanted to hit him where they knew it would hurt.
What we come to find out is that the shooting of Scooter was in retaliation for what Fred had done to Devontae earlier that day. A payback, 100%.
And I was like, damn, that's kind of messed up. It hurt my feelings even more knowing Scooter wasn't the person or involved in whatever happened earlier that day. I had no idea about nothing, and I could have died with something I had nothing to do with.
Investigators charge Catchings in connection with Devontae Robinson's shooting and turn their focus on Mitchell. When the crime lab completes its tests on the gun recovered after Scooter's shooting, they confirm it was the murder weapon. An informant said Catchings had done it and led them to the gun. But there's no way to prove Mitchell pulled the trigger.
Okay, we've heard that Cortez Mitchell did this. We've matched the ballistics. That still doesn't say Cortez Mitchell did it.
No prints recovered from the gun. But fingerprints are very fragile. They aren't always there. Building a case, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove.
And I think this is a part of a frustration for the public. It's like they say, y'all know who did it. But investigators get one bite at the apple because of double jeopardy. Just because you know who did it, you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt when you take it into court. And if you don't have it, you can't bring those charges.
As they work to develop more evidence, detectives fear the violence will continue.
Street justice doesn't operate on probable cause or beyond a reasonable doubt.
The streets don't need the same amount of evidence to bring someone to trial. You said he did it. I know he did it. We're going to take care of it ourselves.
On October 10th, 2016, those fears are realized.
Before investigators can make a move to arrest Mitchell, gunfire erupts in West Baltimore once again. Cortez Mitchell and Devontae Robertson were together in a vehicle stopped at a red light when an unknown gunman opened fire, killing Mitchell and wounding Robinson once again.
Cortez Mitchell was shot and killed. Literally the exact same way that Scooter was shot and killed. In a vehicle at a stop. The saying is, if you're going to seek revenge, make sure you dig 2 graves. This is a prime example.
As soon as this happens, you go right back to, this is payback, this is retaliation, this has got to be linked to this event.
Since Cortez Mitchell was the only suspect for the murder of Scooter, his death ends the investigation. But Mitchell was never charged with or found guilty of the crime, and no direct evidence ties him or his crew to Scooter's murder. So plenty of questions remain.
Bringing this case to a close was bittersweet. It was, yes, we wanted to get the person involved in the murder of Scooter. No, we didn't want anyone else to die in the process.
Does that give the family the closure that they need? I don't know. Only they can answer that. Because sometimes you want to see them in court. And it's whether they say, I'm guilty because I did it, or the judge or jury says you're guilty because the evidence says so.
For the community, it's not enough. They want someone to be held accountable, not only for Scooter, but to send the message that continued violence won't be tolerated.
With Scooter's suspected killer now murdered, prosecutors push forward to try Fred Catchings for the initial shooting that allegedly spawned this cycle of payback.
But the violence is far from over. More than a year has passed since the string of shootings that claimed the lives of multiple men, including Baltimore rapper Lil Scooter. And the city is still reeling.
Scooter had so much potential. He had kids like literally passing out like to get next to him. His son was probably about 3 or 4 at the time, and he loved Scooter. Losing him, it's like everybody lost someone that day.
It's a tragedy worsened by the fact that the man who may have set it all in motion was one of Scooter's associates, Fred Catchings.
I didn't know Fred as well as I knew Scooter. From what they say, he was in the streets and he was about his business, but I didn't see that in Scooter. Scooter stood for what he stood for, and if he had an issue, I'm pretty sure he would do whatever it is he had to do, but not just outright just trying to hurt somebody.
Regardless of what you end up doing, you have to watch your circle. And even when you might be making it, it might be some people that still are trapped in that world and lost in that world, and they can bring you down if they're not ready to get out.
Fred Catchings decides to make a deal with prosecutors.
Catchings initially pleads not guilty to charges of attempted murder, but with the evidence and his own admission, he ultimately pleads guilty to 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder and the use of a handgun.
In August 2017, Fred Catchings is sentenced to 32 years in prison. But the cycle of violence doesn't end. In 2019, his intended victim, Devontae Robinson, is targeted by someone else.
Devontae Robinson was later shot and killed, literally in the exact same way that Cortez Mitchell was shot and killed and Scooter was shot and killed. And we're still looking for the persons responsible for that.
The murders of Devontae Robinson, Cortez Mitchell, and Scooter's manager Trayvon Lee remain unsolved.
It's not the closure anyone was looking for, but those who remember Lord Scooter will always find inspiration in his life and his music.
There are certain preludes in life that leads to success, whether it be a better education, a good job. Scooter found a future in his talent as a rapper.
People need to hear his story because, you know, he came from a struggle and survived some things and was trying to do the right thing and show young people the right thing.
I think he's seen what the other side looked like. I think he felt it, he could smell it. And, you know, for him not to be able to complete that task, you know, was unfortunate. Not only for the complexity of that situation, but the entire culture of Baltimore, young men and women.
One thing I will say to up-and-coming artists, the children that look up to artists like Scooter, you don't have to go the street route. There's nothing glorious about starving and selling drugs and killing one another. That's not glorious. What's glorious is being victorious and coming out of it and giving back to your community and getting us all out of that situation. People don't realize when you take a life, you don't just take that life. You take so many other people around that love them.
When you're that close to a person, you're not thinking about money and fame and all that. Hurt is hurt. You can't skip past that. You can lose money. You
November 27, 1995. The rain had already claimed the afternoon long before the sun was supposed to disappear. Low clouds pressed down over the rolling hills of Surrey, turning the countryside into a landscape of muted greens and endless grey. The roads were slick with fresh rain, their surfaces reflecting the weak glow of headlights as cars drifted through the quiet towns that connected villages scattered across southern England. It was the kind of day people rarely remembered. A Monday wrapped in routine. School bells rang. Shops opened their doors. Buses followed their schedules. Parents hurried through another ordinary afternoon, expecting their children to return home before dinner. Somewhere among those familiar rhythms was a 16-year-old girl who had already decided that this day would not unfold like any other. Her name was Ruth Wilson. Before the day was over, she would vanish without a scream, without a witness, without a single confirmed trace. Nearly 3 decades later, investigators, journalists, psychologists, and countless strangers would still be asking the same impossible question. What really happened to Ruth Wilson? Some mysteries begin with violence. Others begin with a body. This one begins with silence. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence that arrives after the last known moment of certainty. There was no struggle captured on camera. No desperate emergency call. No blood-stained clothing abandoned beside a lonely road. No fingerprints leading detectives toward a killer. Only a teenager standing alone beneath a cold November sky, watching a taxi disappear into the distance as rain collected on her coat. The driver looked back one final time before pulling away. She wasn't waving. She wasn't walking. She wasn't trying to flag down another car. She simply stood there, motionless, as though she was waiting for someone only she expected to arrive. That image has never left the people connected to this case. It has become frozen in time, replayed endlessly in documentaries, newspaper articles, police reviews, and internet discussions. A young girl. A rainy afternoon. A lonely hillside. Then nothing. If this were a crime novel, the next chapter would reveal footprints leading into the woods. Search teams would uncover a discarded backpack or a torn piece of clothing caught between branches. Detectives would discover hidden messages pointing toward an obvious suspect. The audience would begin assembling the puzzle one clue at a time. But real life is rarely so generous. Reality often refuses to explain itself. Reality allows people to disappear without permission, without logic, and sometimes without ever leaving behind enough evidence to tell their story. That is what makes the disappearance of Ruth Wilson so deeply unsettling. Every answer seems possible. Every explanation feels incomplete. Imagine standing on Box Hill that evening. The wind carries the smell of wet earth and fallen leaves. The trees sway gently, their bare branches scratching against one another like whispers passing through the forest. Visibility fades as daylight retreats behind thick clouds. Paths that seem welcoming during summer become dark ribbons disappearing into dense woodland. The rain softens every sound. Footsteps become difficult to distinguish. Voices travel strangely across the hills. Somewhere beyond those trees lies open countryside stretching for miles. Somewhere beyond them are roads, villages, isolated farms, hidden footpaths, abandoned places where a person could vanish from sight in only a matter of minutes. It is beautiful. It is peaceful. It is also the perfect place for certainty to dissolve. The strange thing about missing person cases is that they force everyone into the uncomfortable position of becoming both investigator and storyteller. Every family member remembers conversations differently. Every witness notices different details. Every journalist emphasizes another clue. Every online discussion introduces another theory. Over time, memories become intertwined with speculation until separating fact from assumption becomes almost impossible. One person believes she ran away to begin another life. Another insists she planned to end her own. Someone else imagines an unknown predator waiting in the shadows. None of these possibilities have ever been proven. Yet none of them have ever completely disappeared either. The mystery survives because every explanation contains pieces that seem to fit and pieces that refuse to. There is something profoundly human about wanting mysteries to end. We crave conclusions because conclusions restore order. They reassure us that terrible events belong to the past rather than lingering in the present. A solved case allows grief to change shape. Families can mourn. Communities can heal. Investigators can close files that have occupied years of their lives. But an unsolved disappearance denies everyone that relief. Instead of an ending, it creates an endless series of unfinished sentences. Where did she go? Who saw her after that final taxi ride? Was she alone? Was she frightened? Did she intend to disappear, or did someone else decide her fate? Those questions continue echoing because no one has been able to silence them with evidence. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this case is not what investigators know, but what they don't. They know Ruth reached Box Hill. They know she arrived there in the late afternoon while rain fell steadily across Surrey. They know the taxi driver left her standing alone. After that, certainty collapses. Every minute that followed exists behind a locked door no one has ever managed to open. Did someone approach her within moments? Did she begin walking into the woods? Did another vehicle stop nearby? Did she meet someone she trusted? Or did she choose a path entirely on her own? The landscape keeps those answers hidden, as though the hills themselves absorbed the final chapter of her story. There is another reason this mystery refuses to fade. Ruth was not a child who simply wandered away. She was 16 years old, intelligent, thoughtful, and known by those around her as someone who spent time reading, listening to music, and thinking deeply about the world around her. Teenagers often carry emotional burdens invisible to adults. They learn to smile during conversations while wrestling privately with fears they struggle to explain. Adults frequently mistake quietness for peace. Yet silence can hide confusion, loneliness, anger, or heartbreak. Understanding who Ruth was requires more than listing facts from a police report. It requires asking what occupied her thoughts during the final weeks before she disappeared. What questions remained unanswered in her own mind? What emotions followed her onto that taxi ride through the rain? When people hear about unsolved disappearances, they often imagine dramatic conspiracies, secret organizations, elaborate kidnappings, hidden criminals whose identities remain buried for decades. Reality tends to be less theatrical but infinitely more disturbing. Sometimes the greatest mystery is created not by complexity, but by absence. One missing decision. One unnoticed encounter. One ordinary moment that becomes irreversible simply because nobody realized its importance until it was already gone. That possibility shadows every minute of Ruth Wilson's story. Somewhere within a sequence of completely ordinary events, something extraordinary happened. The tragedy is that no one knows exactly where that transformation occurred. Even today, if you visit Box Hill on a rainy afternoon, it is easy to understand why the location continues to fascinate investigators and visitors alike. The landscape possesses a quiet beauty that feels almost timeless. Families walk the trails. Cyclists climb the winding roads. Hikers stop to admire views stretching across the Surrey countryside. Nothing about the scenery suggests it once became the final confirmed location of a missing schoolgirl. Nature has an unsettling ability to move forward without acknowledging human tragedy. Trees continue growing. Leaves continue falling. Rain continues washing away footprints long after the people who made them have disappeared. Somewhere within those hills lies the dividing line between the life everyone knew and the mystery that followed. On one side stands Ruth Wilson, a 16-year-old girl moving through what appeared to be another ordinary Monday. On the other side exists a question that has endured for decades, resisting every investigation, every theory, every renewed search. Between those two moments is an invisible threshold no one has ever crossed. Tonight, we begin walking toward that threshold. Not to sensationalize a tragedy or invent answers where none exist, but to carefully examine every confirmed step, every unanswered question, and every fragile thread connecting the final known hours of Ruth Wilson's life. Because sometimes the most chilling stories are not the ones that end with a confession. Sometimes they are the ones that simply stop. The first instinct is always to search for the moment everything went wrong. We picture disasters as explosions, arguments, desperate phone calls, or footsteps running through the darkness. We expect tragedy to announce itself. But life has a habit of disguising its turning points. Sometimes they arrive wearing the face of an ordinary morning, hidden beneath familiar routines that no one has any reason to question. The people closest to Ruth Wilson woke up on November 27 believing they were living through another Monday. None of them knew they were already standing at the edge of a story that would outlive newspaper headlines, police appeals, and even generations of investigators. There is something deeply unsettling about cases that refuse to age. Most crimes eventually settle into history. They become chapters in old case files, remembered only by those directly affected. Ruth's disappearance never had that luxury. Every few years, the case resurfaced. A renewed police review. Another newspaper article. A documentary revisiting forgotten details. An internet forum filled with strangers comparing theories late into the night. Each revival carried the same promise that perhaps this time, someone would notice the one overlooked detail capable of breaking decades of silence. And every time, that promise dissolved back into uncertainty. That uncertainty has become almost as famous as Ruth herself. Ask 10 people familiar with the case what they believe happened, and you are likely to hear 10 different answers. Some speak with quiet certainty that she intended to disappear. They point toward her unusual decisions on the day she vanished, suggesting they were carefully planned rather than impulsive. Others reject that idea completely. They see a vulnerable teenager carrying emotional burdens that few adults truly understood, a girl whose inner world may have become too heavy to bear. Then there are those convinced another person entered the story during its final chapter, someone whose name has never appeared in police files, someone whose presence lasted only minutes yet changed everything forever. Each theory has supporters. Each theory has weaknesses. And after all these years, none has crossed the invisible line separating possibility from proof. Perhaps that is why this story continues to haunt people who have never set foot in Surrey. It confronts us with a reality most of us try not to think about. We move through our lives believing that every important event leaves behind evidence. We trust that modern investigations can reconstruct the past through science, surveillance, or technology. But Ruth disappeared in an era when CCTV cameras were rare, mobile phones were not carried by every teenager, GPS tracking did not exist, and digital footprints had yet to become part of everyday life. If someone stepped away from public view in 1995, they could become astonishingly difficult to find. The world Ruth lived in was quieter. People memorized telephone numbers instead of saving them in contacts. Teenagers arranged meetings days in advance because instant messaging had not yet transformed communication. Libraries remained places where students disappeared into rows of books rather than glowing screens. Taxi rides left paper records instead of digital maps. Entire afternoons could pass without anyone knowing exactly where another person had been. Looking back from the present, it feels almost impossible to imagine. Yet that was the world surrounding Ruth during her final known hours, a world where ordinary gaps in daily life could easily become permanent mysteries. It is tempting to imagine missing person investigations as dramatic races against time, detectives sprinting through forests while helicopters circle overhead. Those moments certainly exist. But long before the search begins, investigators face another challenge that is far less cinematic and far more complicated. They must reconstruct the victim's final day almost minute by minute, asking questions that seem insignificant until viewed through the lens of disappearance. Why did she choose that route instead of another? Why visit one place but not the next? Why speak to this person yet avoid someone else? Why carry certain belongings while leaving others behind? Each answer creates another question. Each question opens another possibility. Imagine trying to solve a 1,000-piece puzzle after someone has quietly removed half the pieces before you even open the box. That is the reality detectives inherited. And unlike many criminal investigations, they could not even begin by asking the central witness what had happened. Ruth herself was gone. As the years passed, the missing spaces around her life grew larger than the confirmed facts. Memory became both an ally and an enemy. Friends searched their recollections for overlooked conversations. Teachers replayed ordinary classroom moments in their minds, wondering whether they had missed signs of distress. Family members revisited birthdays, holidays, arguments, and quiet evenings, examining each one with painful hindsight. Human memory, however, is not a perfect recording device. It changes under pressure. It fills empty spaces. It connects events that once seemed unrelated. What felt meaningless before a disappearance suddenly acquires enormous significance afterward. A simple goodbye becomes suspicious. An unfinished sentence becomes symbolic. A forgotten smile becomes heartbreaking. The danger is that hindsight can reshape the past until certainty becomes impossible to separate from emotion. This is one reason investigators often return to the same witnesses years later. Not because they expect lies, but because memories evolve. People remember new fragments. Others unconsciously rewrite old ones. The truth remains somewhere beneath layers of grief, speculation, and time. Then there is the landscape itself. Box Hill is more than a point on a map. It is a place filled with contradictions. During daylight, it welcomes families, hikers, photographers, and cyclists who climb its winding roads for panoramic views across the Surrey countryside. Ancient woodland stretches between open grasslands. Narrow paths weave through trees that have watched centuries pass in silence. The scenery inspires peace, reflection, and escape. Yet every beautiful place possesses another face after darkness falls. The same trails become confusing corridors. The same trees transform into towering silhouettes. Distances seem longer. Sounds become impossible to locate. A single person standing alone can disappear from sight after only a few dozen steps. Rain only deepens the illusion. It erases footprints. It muffles voices. It blurs outlines until people become little more than moving shadows against the landscape. On that November afternoon, weather was not merely background scenery. It became another silent participant in the story, washing away opportunities that investigators would desperately wish had remained untouched. There is a phrase detectives sometimes use when discussing difficult investigations. They describe certain moments as the last point of certainty. Everything before that point can be verified. Everything after becomes speculation until evidence says otherwise. For Ruth Wilson, the last point of certainty is hauntingly simple. A taxi stops. A young girl steps out. The driver receives payment. Rain falls steadily. The vehicle pulls away. In the mirror, he sees her still standing where he left her. Then the road curves. She disappears from view. No one can honestly say what happened next. That final confirmed image has become almost mythological because it represents the exact instant the known world gives way to mystery. Every investigator who has studied the case eventually returns to that same moment, asking the same impossible question. If the taxi driver had looked back 1 minute later, would he have seen someone walking toward her? Would he have noticed another vehicle? Would he have seen Ruth walking confidently away? Or would the scene have remained exactly the same, a lone teenager standing patiently in the rain? 1 minute. Sometimes history turns on less. The human mind dislikes unfinished stories. It naturally searches for patterns, trying to impose order on chaos. That instinct explains why unsolved disappearances often become surrounded by rumors. Every unidentified sighting gains attention. Every anonymous letter becomes important. Every coincidence begins to resemble evidence. Over time, the story threatens to drift away from reality, carried by the imagination of thousands of people determined to solve a mystery that official investigations could not. Yet beneath every theory remains a real person. Not a symbol. Not an internet puzzle. A 16-year-old girl with dreams, fears, habits, favorite songs, unfinished conversations, and a future that should have stretched decades beyond that rainy Monday. It is easy to lose sight of that truth when discussing clues and timelines. But before Ruth became one of Britain's most enduring missing person cases, she was simply a daughter trying to understand her own world. And perhaps nowhere is that world more important than inside the walls of the home she left behind. Because long before the taxi ride, long before Box Hill, long before search teams combed the forests and newspaper headlines spread across the country, another story had already begun. A quieter story. One shaped by family secrets, unanswered questions, and emotional wounds that were almost invisible to everyone looking from the outside. To understand why November 27th unfolded the way it did, we first have to understand the life Ruth was living before anyone realized it was about to disappear forever. Before a person becomes a missing poster taped to a shop window or a name repeated in television reports, they exist in countless ordinary moments that never make it into official files. They laugh at jokes no one else remembers. They leave half-finished books beside their bed. They worry about exams, friendships, awkward conversations, and futures that still seem impossibly far away. Police reports rarely have room for those details. Timelines reduce lives to dates and locations. Witness statements compress personalities into a handful of adjectives. But real lives are never that small. Real lives are built from routines so ordinary that they become invisible until one day they suddenly stop. That is perhaps the greatest tragedy hidden inside every unsolved disappearance. Life does not simply end. It is interrupted. A bedroom remains exactly as it was left. A favorite sweater stays folded in a drawer. A library card expires without being renewed. Birthday candles go unlit. Christmas presents remain unopened. Family photographs continue to age while one face inside them never grows older. Time moves relentlessly forward for everyone else, yet for the missing, it seems to freeze forever at the moment they vanished. For Ruth Wilson, that frozen moment would always be 16 years old. Think about that for a moment. The classmates who once shared classrooms with her grew into adulthood. Some built careers. Others married and started families of their own. Teachers retired. Detectives assigned to the original investigation eventually left the force. Technology transformed the world beyond recognition. Children born after Ruth disappeared are now older than she was on the day she was last seen. And yet, every photograph released by police still shows the same teenage girl looking back through time, forever caught between childhood and adulthood. That is one of the cruelest consequences of an unresolved case. The missing never age. Only the people waiting for answers do. For those left behind, uncertainty creates a unique kind of grief. Most losses, painful as they are, eventually arrive at a destination. There is a funeral. There is a grave. There is a final goodbye, however heartbreaking. But when someone disappears, hope refuses to die completely. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, more cautious, less certain. Yet it survives. Every unexpected phone call brings a moment of hesitation. Every unidentified person mentioned in the news sparks impossible questions. Every knock at the door carries a heartbeat of expectation before reality returns. Psychologists sometimes describe this as living between two worlds, unable to fully mourn, yet unable to truly believe everything will be all right. Families trapped in that space often speak of feeling suspended in time, as though life continued around them while they remained waiting at the same unanswered question. It is difficult to imagine carrying that weight not for weeks or months, but for decades. And still waking each morning without knowing. As this story unfolds, you may find yourself searching for certainty. It is a natural instinct. We all want a hidden witness to emerge. We hope for forgotten evidence tucked away in an archive. We imagine an elderly stranger finally deciding to tell police what they saw all those years ago. Cases like this invite optimism because they challenge us to believe that every mystery must eventually surrender to the truth. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes a single DNA sample changes everything. Sometimes a forgotten photograph exposes the missing piece. Sometimes a confession arrives after years of silence. But sometimes the answers remain buried beneath ordinary moments that seemed too insignificant to notice until it was already too late. That possibility lingers over every chapter of Ruth Wilson's disappearance. Somewhere within an ordinary Monday, an extraordinary event occurred. Whether it lasted seconds or hours, whether it involved another person or only Ruth herself, no one has ever been able to reconstruct it with confidence. That uncertainty is why this case continues to occupy such a unique place in the history of British missing person investigations. It is not remembered because investigators uncovered shocking forensic evidence or because a notorious criminal stood trial. It is remembered because almost every confirmed fact seems to point in a different direction. One detail suggests careful planning. Another hints at emotional turmoil. A third opens the possibility of outside involvement. Each clue appears meaningful. Together, they refuse to form a complete picture. Imagine assembling a jigsaw puzzle where every piece belongs to a different image. Individually, they look convincing. Side by side, they contradict one another. That is the challenge investigators have faced for nearly 30 years. And perhaps that is why Ruth's story continues to resonate with people who discover it for the first time. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the world. Not every mystery has a satisfying conclusion. Not every question receives an answer. Sometimes the most disturbing stories are not the ones we understand, but the ones we never will. Yet giving up on unanswered questions has never been the purpose of true crime. The purpose is not simply to identify a culprit. It is to preserve memory. To separate fact from rumor. To remember that behind every headline stood a real human being whose story deserves to be told with care rather than speculation. Throughout this series, we will examine every confirmed event surrounding Ruth Wilson's disappearance. We will slow the timeline until even the smallest decisions become visible. We will explore the emotional landscape surrounding her final weeks without pretending to know what remained inside her private thoughts. We will revisit the search that followed, the theories that emerged, the investigations that stalled, and the questions that still refuse to disappear. But we will also resist a temptation that has followed this case for years, the temptation to confuse mystery with certainty. Where the evidence speaks, we will listen. Where the evidence falls silent, we will acknowledge that silence. Because sometimes honesty is more unsettling than any theory. Somewhere, whether hidden in fading memories, forgotten records, or a truth that has never been spoken aloud, the final chapter of Ruth Wilson's story already exists. The tragedy is that no one has found it. Not yet. So before we follow Ruth into the final days leading to that rain-soaked afternoon in Surrey, before we examine the decisions that continue to puzzle investigators, and before we begin separating verified facts from decades of speculation, we need to step back from the mystery itself and meet the young woman at its center. Not the missing person. Not the headline. Not the symbol of an unsolved case. Just Ruth. Because every mystery begins with a life. And before that life became one of Britain's most enduring disappearances, it belonged to a 16-year-old girl who, like countless teenagers, was trying to understand her place in a world that had already become far more complicated than anyone around her realized. That is where the Rayal story begins. There is a dangerous illusion that often follows unsolved cases. The longer a mystery survives, the more its central figure begins to disappear behind the mystery itself. Their name becomes inseparable from theories, timelines, police appeals, and unanswered questions. Eventually, people stop asking who they were and begin asking only what happened to them. Ruth Wilson has lived inside that illusion for decades. To many, she is remembered as the girl who vanished at Box Hill. But long before she became one of Britain's most enduring missing person cases, she was simply a 16-year-old trying to navigate a world that was becoming increasingly difficult to understand. To understand why investigators continue returning to every small decision Ruth made during her final days, we first have to leave behind the police reports and step into the quieter spaces of her life. Not because those moments contain dramatic clues, but because they reveal something far more important. They remind us that every unexplained disappearance begins with an ordinary human story. In the mid-1990s, Surrey was often described as one of England's more peaceful counties. Rolling hills stretched between tidy villages, narrow country lanes wound through ancient woodland, and commuter towns balanced rural charm with easy access to London. It was a place where life appeared predictable. School uniforms filled train stations each morning. Small shops knew their regular customers by name. Families planned weekends around football matches, church services, walks through the countryside, or afternoons spent in local cafes. To outsiders, it was exactly the kind of place where terrible things were not supposed to happen. Yet appearances have always been unreliable. Communities that seem quiet from the outside often contain private struggles invisible to everyone except those living behind closed doors. Every neighborhood has homes where laughter hides tension, where polite conversations conceal painful silences, where children learn far earlier than adults realize that families can carry secrets for years. Ruth grew up in that world. From everything that has been publicly confirmed, she was regarded as intelligent, thoughtful, and academically capable. She enjoyed reading, a habit that often reflected more than simple curiosity. Books offered escape, but they also offered answers. For teenagers trying to understand themselves, stories become mirrors. Within their pages, complicated emotions suddenly seem less lonely. Characters wrestle with questions adults cannot easily explain. Happy endings become reassuring not because they are realistic, but because they promise that confusion does not last forever. Friends and those who knew Ruth described her as someone who could be quiet without appearing withdrawn. There is an important difference between the two. Quiet people are often misunderstood. Adults frequently mistake silence for contentment. Teachers assume that students who do not disrupt class are doing well. Parents sometimes interpret independence as emotional stability. But silence tells us very little about what someone carries inside. A teenager can spend an entire afternoon smiling politely, complete every assignment on time, return every greeting, and still feel completely alone. That contradiction is one of adolescence's greatest mysteries. 16 is an age balanced uneasily between childhood and adulthood. Expectations grow faster than confidence. Young people are encouraged to make decisions that may shape the rest of their lives while still trying to understand who they are becoming. Friendships shift with astonishing speed. Small disappointments feel enormous. Questions about identity become impossible to ignore. At that age, emotions rarely arrive one at a time. Hope exists beside fear. Excitement collides with uncertainty. A single conversation can brighten an entire week or quietly unravel it. Ruth was living inside that complicated season of life. The England of 1995 was also very different from the connected world we know today. Teenagers did not carry smartphones documenting every hour of their lives. Social media did not preserve conversations or locations. If someone spent an afternoon alone, there was often no digital trail explaining where they had been or what they had been thinking. Privacy was not unusual. It was simply normal. Looking back now, that absence feels almost unimaginable. Today, investigators often reconstruct disappearances through text messages, search histories, GPS records, social media activity, and surveillance footage. Ruth left behind almost none of those modern footprints. Instead, detectives had to rely on conversations, handwritten notes, witness memories, taxi records, and fragmented observations. The result was a portrait built from human recollection rather than electronic certainty. That distinction matters. Technology records behavior. Memory interprets it. And interpretation is never perfect. There is another challenge that appears repeatedly in cases involving teenagers. Adults often search for dramatic warning signs, believing tragedy always announces itself in advance. They expect obvious behavioral changes, emotional breakdowns, confrontations, or clear declarations of intent. Real life is rarely that generous. Emotional struggles frequently develop beneath routines that appear completely ordinary. A teenager may continue attending school, completing homework, talking with friends, and participating in family life while privately wrestling with questions they cannot yet put into words. Nothing about Ruth's outward appearance suggested that history was quietly approaching. She was not known as someone constantly seeking attention. She did not become the center of school gossip. She was simply another student moving through another academic year. That normality is precisely what makes her disappearance so difficult to reconcile. When people first learn about Ruth's case, They often expect investigators to uncover a hidden double life, a secret relationship, criminal connections, unexplained financial activity, or evidence of elaborate planning stretching back months. Those discoveries make for compelling fiction. Reality offered something far more subtle. Instead of dramatic revelations, investigators encountered ordinary routines interrupted by deeply personal questions. Questions that rarely leave fingerprints. Questions that cannot be photographed. Questions that become visible only after someone is no longer there to answer them. As we move deeper into Ruth's story, one theme begins appearing again and again. Identity. Not identity in the legal sense. Identity in the deeply personal sense every teenager eventually confronts. Who am I? Who can I trust? Why do people I love keep things from me? Where do I belong? Most young people ask these questions gradually over years. For Ruth, those questions would become far more immediate. There is an old saying that families are built as much from the stories they tell as from the truths they share. Children understand the world through narratives handed down by parents and relatives. They believe what they are told because trust comes naturally long before skepticism develops. Home becomes the place where reality feels stable. But what happens when one of those stories begins to unravel? What happens when something you believed throughout your childhood suddenly proves untrue? The ground beneath a person's identity can shift with astonishing speed. For adults, discovering a family secret is painful. For an adolescent already searching for certainty, it can feel seismic. That emotional landscape would become one of the defining elements surrounding Ruth's final months. It is also one of the most carefully discussed aspects of the investigation because it exists at the delicate intersection between confirmed fact and psychological interpretation. Investigators have never claimed to know exactly what Ruth was thinking. No one can. The private world inside another person's mind is inaccessible, especially after they disappear. What remains are conversations remembered by others, observable changes in behavior, and events significant enough to reshape a young person's understanding of her own family. Those events would not provide definitive answers. But they would raise questions that continue to echo through every discussion of this case. Questions about trust. Questions about grief. Questions about the hidden emotional weight a 16-year-old may have been carrying long before anyone realized how heavy it had become. Because before Ruth Wilson ever stepped into a taxi on that rainy November afternoon. Before Box Hill became forever connected to her name. Before search teams combed forests and newspaper headlines spread across Britain. Another journey had already begun. It was invisible. It left no physical evidence. And it started with a truth that had remained hidden for years. For much of her childhood, Ruth believed she understood one of the most painful chapters in her family's history. Like many children, she accepted the explanations offered by the adults around her without questioning them. When she was younger, she had been told that her mother had died in an accident, a tragic fall down a flight of stairs. It was a heartbreaking story, but it was simple. Accidents happen. They are cruel, unfair, and impossible to undo, yet they fit within a framework that even a child can eventually learn to accept. An accident carries no unanswered intention. It asks for grief, not interpretation. As the years passed, however, that explanation began to fracture. At some point during her teenage years, Ruth learned that the story she had grown up believing was not the complete truth. Publicly available information indicates that her mother had not died in the accidental manner Ruth had been led to believe. Instead, her mother had died by suicide years earlier. That revelation is one of the few deeply personal facts in this case that has been consistently discussed because of the profound impact it may have had on Ruth's emotional world. It is important to approach it with care. We cannot know exactly how Ruth processed that discovery, nor should we pretend to reconstruct thoughts she never had the opportunity to share publicly. What we can say is that learning such a family secret during adolescence has the potential to reshape a young person's understanding of the past, of the people closest to them, and even of themselves. Imagine spending years building your identity upon one version of your family's history. Then, almost without warning, discovering that one of its foundations had never been true. The loss itself had always been real. The grief had always been real. But the story surrounding that grief suddenly became something different. For many people, discovering that a parent died by suicide brings with it an avalanche of complicated emotions that refuse to fit neatly together. There may be sadness for the parent they barely knew. There may be anger toward the adults who chose not to tell the truth sooner. There may be guilt for feeling angry at all. There may be confusion about why the secret existed in the first place. And perhaps most painfully, there may be questions that no one is capable of answering. Why wasn't I told? When was everyone planning to tell me? What else don't I know? Were they protecting me or protecting themselves? Those are not questions unique to Ruth. They are questions many families confront when long-held secrets eventually surface. Children often understand that adults hide painful truths out of love, but understanding the intention does not erase the emotional impact. Trust is rarely damaged by a single revelation alone. It is shaken by the realization that reality can be different from what it appeared for years. For a thoughtful teenager, that realization can ripple outward into every relationship. If one story changed, could others? If the people I depend on kept this from me, what else might remain unspoken? These are not conclusions about Ruth's state of mind. They are reflections on the kinds of emotional conflicts that psychologists recognize as common when significant family secrets emerge during adolescence. Every individual responds differently. Some become more withdrawn. Others seek independence. Some ask endless questions. Others retreat into silence, trying to process emotions they cannot yet explain. Friends later recalled that Ruth had spoken about wanting to leave home at times. That detail has often been repeated in discussions of the case, but it deserves careful context. Teenagers frequently express a desire to leave difficult situations, especially during periods of emotional stress. Such statements do not automatically reveal intent, nor do they predict future actions. They are pieces of a much larger picture, not definitive evidence of any particular outcome. Unfortunately, once a disappearance occurs, every remembered conversation acquires a new and often painful significance. A casual remark becomes a possible warning. An emotional afternoon becomes a possible turning point. A passing comment is replayed over and over, as though repeating it enough times might eventually reveal the answer everyone missed. Memory rarely works that way. It offers fragments, not certainty. One of the challenges investigators faced in Ruth's case was distinguishing between what was known before her disappearance and what only appeared significant afterward. Hindsight has a remarkable ability to reshape ordinary events. People naturally search backward through memory looking for the first crack in the story, hoping to discover the exact moment where everything began to change. But emotional lives do not unfold in straight lines. There is rarely one conversation that explains everything. Rarely one day when all confusion begins. Human beings carry many different emotions at once. A teenager can be excited about the future while grieving the past. They can love their family while feeling misunderstood by them. They can enjoy school while privately questioning where they belong. Contradictions are part of growing up. Ruth's life appears to have been no exception. What makes this aspect of the story so compelling is not that it provides an answer, but that it reveals complexity. It reminds us that people cannot be reduced to a single label. Too often, public discussions of missing person cases fall into simplistic categories. Either the victim was perfectly happy, or they were deeply troubled. Either everything at home was wonderful, or everything was falling apart. Reality almost never fits those extremes. Families are complicated. Teenage emotions are complicated. Grief is complicated. Truth itself is often complicated. As investigators attempted to understand Ruth's final weeks, they were not searching for a dramatic transformation. They were looking for subtle shifts, small changes in routine, conversations that lingered in friends' memories, decisions that seemed ordinary at first but unusual in retrospect. They knew that if Ruth had planned anything, Evidence of that planning might exist in details too small to attract attention before she disappeared. Yet the deeper they looked, the more elusive certainty became. Some observations hinted at careful thought. Others suggested emotional conflict. Neither excluded the other. That ambiguity would eventually become one of the defining characteristics of the entire investigation. The emotional landscape surrounding Ruth's life cannot be understood without recognizing another reality of adolescence. Young people often become remarkably skilled at protecting their inner worlds. Adults tend to assume that visible behavior reflects emotional well-being. Teenagers know otherwise. Many learn to compartmentalize, presenting one version of themselves at school, another at home, and a third that exists only in private moments. A smile does not always mean peace. Silence does not always mean sadness. Normal routines do not always mean nothing is wrong. This is not unique to Ruth. It is simply part of being human. Years later, countless discussions about her disappearance would return to the same central question. What was Ruth thinking? It is perhaps the only question no investigation can answer with certainty. Evidence can establish where someone traveled. Witnesses can describe what they saw. Documents can confirm what occurred. But thoughts leave no fingerprints. Feelings create no forensic evidence. The private conversations we have with ourselves disappear unless we choose to share them. Whatever emotional journey Ruth was navigating during those final weeks belonged to her alone. The people around her saw only glimpses. Investigators inherited only fragments. The public received even less. And somewhere between those fragments lies the emotional backdrop to one of Britain's most enduring mysteries. As the calendar moved toward late November 1995, Ruth continued outwardly through the familiar rhythm of school life. Lessons continued. Libraries remained quiet refuges. Friends met, talked, laughed, and planned for futures that still felt distant. Nothing about the approaching week suggested that history was quietly drawing closer. Yet sometimes, without anyone recognizing it, a person's final ordinary days have already begun. The routines remain the same. The streets look the same. The people they pass each morning have no reason to look twice. Only later does everyone realize they were witnessing moments that would never come again. And for Ruth Wilson, those final ordinary days were now beginning to slip away, carrying her toward a Monday that would forever divide her life into two parts, the years before November 2070 and the mystery that followed. There is a tendency, especially when looking back through the lens of an unsolved mystery, to search every ordinary moment for hidden meaning. A walk to school becomes symbolic. A quiet afternoon seems suspicious. A conversation remembered years later begins to sound like a coded farewell. It is an understandable instinct, but it is also a dangerous one. Most people who disappear spend their final days doing remarkably ordinary things. They eat breakfast. They borrow books. They speak with friends. They make plans that suggest they expect tomorrow to arrive. Ordinary life does not usually announce that it is about to end. That truth sits at the heart of Ruth Wilson's story. By every publicly verified account, she continued moving through the familiar rhythm of adolescence. School remained a constant part of her life. Books continued to occupy her attention. Music offered the kind of quiet companionship that so many teenagers find when words alone are no longer enough. To those around her, she was not living inside a dramatic thriller. She was living inside the complicated, often contradictory reality of being 16. It is worth pausing for a moment to remember what 16 actually feels like. The future still exists mostly as imagination. University, careers, independence, adulthood, they all seem close enough to dream about, yet distant enough to remain abstract. Every decision feels enormous because experience has not yet taught you how many roads remain open. Friendships can feel permanent one week and uncertain the next. Family relationships become more complicated as children begin questioning the people they once accepted without hesitation. At the same time, there is a growing desire to make sense of the world on your own terms. That search for identity is not a sign that something is wrong. It is part of growing up. For Ruth, however, That natural process unfolded alongside the emotional weight of learning a painful truth about her mother's death. Public information suggests that this revelation had affected her deeply. Friends would later recall that she had spoken about wanting to leave home, though they did not interpret those conversations as clear indications that she intended to disappear forever. Such recollections are important because they remind us of the difference between hindsight and certainty. A comment remembered after a disappearance often carries a significance that it never seemed to possess at the time. No one who knew Ruth has publicly described a single moment when they believed she was about to vanish. No teacher reportedly sounded an alarm. No friend contacted police before she disappeared. No one recognized November 27th as the beginning of an enduring mystery. That absence of obvious warning signs continues to challenge investigators even today. As difficult as it is to accept, life often gives us very little notice before it changes forever. There is another aspect of Ruth's personality that quietly emerges from the available information. She appears to have been someone who valued solitude without necessarily rejecting the people around her. Solitude and loneliness are often confused, yet they are not the same. Many thoughtful people seek time alone because it allows them to reflect, read, write, or simply think without interruption. Libraries, in particular, can become places of comfort for those who enjoy observing the world from a quieter distance. This detail would later take on added significance. Not because reading itself is unusual, but because one of the final confirmed locations Ruth visited before disappearing was a library. At first glance, that seems almost insignificant. A student spending time among books is hardly remarkable. Yet in missing person investigations, every ordinary action is eventually revisited. Every stop becomes part of a timeline. Every decision invites another question. Why that library? Why that day? Was she simply passing time? Was she searching for information? Or was it nothing more than an ordinary visit that acquired meaning only because everything that followed remained unexplained? The honest answer is that we do not know. And that honesty matters. One of the reasons Ruth's case has endured for so many years is because it resists simple narratives. It refuses to fit neatly into any single category. Cases involving voluntary disappearances often leave behind unmistakable signs of planning. Cases involving suicide frequently present evidence that investigators can eventually confirm. Cases involving stranger abductions often produce witnesses, forensic evidence, or identifiable suspects. Ruth's disappearance contains elements that appear to point toward several different possibilities while conclusively proving none of them. It is this balance between evidence and uncertainty that makes the investigation so uniquely frustrating. Every clue seems to whisper. None of them speak loudly enough to be certain. As November progressed toward its final week, England settled into the familiar rhythm of late autumn. Trees surrendered the last of their leaves. Mornings arrived with damp air and fading daylight. By late afternoon, the countryside already carried the atmosphere of early evening. Rain drifted across Surrey in frequent waves, transforming fields into muted shades of brown and green. Footpaths became softer underfoot, while the dense woodland surrounding places like Box Hill seemed even more isolated beneath low clouds. To most people, the weather was nothing more than another inconvenience. To investigators looking back later, it became part of the story. Rain changes landscapes in subtle ways. It washes away footprints before anyone realizes they matter. It blurs tire tracks. It discourages people from lingering outdoors. It reduces the number of potential witnesses. It softens sounds that might otherwise travel across open ground. Nature itself becomes less willing to preserve evidence. No one could have known that such details would eventually become significant. On the evening before November 27th, there was no nationwide search underway. No police officers were preparing missing person reports. No helicopters waited on standby. No journalists anticipated a headline that would still be discussed decades later. The world remained entirely ordinary. That ordinary world is important because it reminds us of one simple truth. Mysteries do not begin with mystery. They begin with normal life. Only afterward do we recognize where the ordinary ended. As historians often say, people living through history rarely know they are making it. The same is true of tragedy. Ruth woke on the morning of November 27th without knowing that every movement she made would one day be reconstructed by detectives. Every journey would be mapped. Every conversation revisited. Every confirmed sighting analyzed. The places she entered would become points on an investigative timeline. The people who crossed her path would eventually be asked to remember details they had no reason to notice at the time. That burden is one shared by many witnesses in unsolved cases. They spend years wondering whether they overlooked something important. Could I have asked one more question? Should I have paid closer attention? Was there something unusual that only became obvious later? Most of the time, the answer is painfully simple. There was nothing to notice. Because at the time, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. And perhaps that is the most haunting aspect of Ruth Wilson's story before her disappearance. It was, by all outward appearances, the story of an ordinary teenager living an ordinary life while quietly carrying questions that only she fully understood. Questions about family. Questions about identity. Questions about the future. Questions that may or may not have influenced the choices she would soon make. The investigation would eventually devote enormous attention to those final choices. Where she went. Who she met. Why she made decisions that seemed so unusual in hindsight. But before detectives, journalists, and the public began assembling timelines, those decisions belonged only to Ruth. They unfolded one after another, unnoticed by almost everyone around her. And somewhere within that sequence of seemingly ordinary moments, the final confirmed day of her known life quietly began. The morning of Monday, November 27, 1995, did not arrive with any sign that it would become one of the most examined days in the history of Surrey's missing person investigations. It arrived like every other Monday. Routine. Familiar. Forgettable. Until it wasn't. Every missing person investigation begins with a name, an age, and a date. Those three details fit neatly into police databases, newspaper headlines, and television broadcasts. They are efficient. Easy to remember. Easy to repeat. But they tell us almost nothing about the person who disappeared. They cannot explain what made someone laugh, what frightened them, what dreams they carried into the future, or what private thoughts occupied the quiet moments between conversations. When those human details disappear beneath the weight of an investigation, the victim slowly becomes evidence instead of a person. Before we follow Ruth Wilson through the final day of her known life, it is important to pause and remember who she was beyond the mystery that came to define her name. Imagine opening the bedroom door of an ordinary 16-year-old girl in England during the autumn of 1995. There are no glowing phone screens resting beside the bed. No social media notifications demanding attention. No endless stream of digital conversations preserved forever in cloud storage. Instead, the room reflects a quieter era. Shelves filled with books collected over years rather than months. School notebooks stacked beside textbooks marked with handwritten notes. Music waiting on cassette tapes or compact discs, each album chosen carefully because buying one meant committing to it, listening from beginning to end rather than skipping endlessly between songs. Letters, photographs, perhaps postcards tucked into drawers. A school uniform hanging neatly for another Monday morning. Whether Ruth's room looked exactly like this is something no public record fully describes. But it reflects the everyday world inhabited by thousands of British teenagers during the mid-1990s, a world where personal identity was often built from physical objects rather than digital profiles. For someone like Ruth, books appear to have held particular importance. Reading is a deeply personal habit. Some people read to be entertained. Others read because stories provide language for emotions they cannot yet explain. A novel can become a private conversation between writer and reader, offering comfort without demanding that difficult feelings be spoken aloud. Teenagers especially often discover parts of themselves inside fictional characters long before they feel ready to reveal those parts to anyone else. There is something revealing about people who willingly spend hours inside libraries. Libraries ask nothing from their visitors except patience. They reward curiosity rather than confidence. Within their walls, quiet is not awkward. It is expected. For thoughtful young people, they become places where time slows enough for the mind to wander freely. This detail may seem small, but it helps paint a portrait that feels more human than any police description ever could. Ruth was not simply moving through life from one obligation to the next. She appears to have been someone who thought deeply, who sought knowledge, and who found comfort in environments where reflection was possible. Those qualities matter because they remind us that intelligence does not protect anyone from emotional pain. If anything, it can sometimes intensify it. People who spend much of their lives thinking often become skilled at asking difficult questions. Unfortunately, life does not always provide satisfying answers. By the age of 16, Ruth had already experienced something many children never should. She had grown up without her biological mother. Loss shapes people in ways that are difficult to measure. A child who loses a parent early in life often grows accustomed to absence before fully understanding what has been taken away. Birthdays, school events, holidays, each milestone quietly reinforces the presence of someone who is no longer there. Sometimes the absence becomes so familiar that it feels almost normal. Then adolescence arrives. Children become old enough to ask questions that once seemed impossible to articulate. They begin wondering not only what happened, but why. Who was my mother beyond the stories people tell? What kind of person was she? What parts of her live on in me? Those questions become even more complicated when the answers change. Publicly available information indicates that Ruth eventually learned the truth about the circumstances surrounding her mother's death after years of believing a different explanation. No matter how carefully adults believed they were protecting her, that revelation had the potential to alter far more than one memory. It challenged the narrative through which she had understood her own childhood. Imagine reading the first half of a novel only to discover that its opening chapters had been rewritten without your knowledge. Everything that follows suddenly feels different. Not because the events changed, but because their meaning did. We cannot know exactly how Ruth responded internally to that discovery. No investigator can reconstruct another person's private emotional life with complete certainty. What we can recognize is that adolescence is already a period defined by questions of identity. Adding profound family revelations to that journey creates emotional complexity that few teenagers are fully prepared to navigate. Those who knew Ruth publicly described her as intelligent and thoughtful. Neither description suggests someone without emotion. Quite the opposite. Thoughtful people often carry questions longer than others. They revisit conversations. They analyze memories. They search for patterns where none may exist. Sometimes they become their own harshest critics. Again, none of this tells us what Ruth believed or intended. It simply reminds us that human beings are layered. Reducing any missing person to a single explanation does violence to the complexity of real life. One of the greatest mistakes people make when studying true crime is believing that victims exist only in relation to the crimes committed against them. They do not. They existed before the headlines. They had favorite places before investigators mapped them. They had routines before detectives transformed those routines into timelines. They laughed before journalists repeated their names. Remembering that distinction is an act of respect. It restores humanity where mystery has threatened to erase it. Friends occupy a unique place in any teenager's life. Parents provide structure. Teachers provide instruction. Friends witness the version of ourselves we are still becoming. With friends, conversations often drift toward dreams, fears, frustrations, and hopes that never reach adult ears. Public accounts suggest that Ruth maintained friendships and attended school much like other students her age. Those friendships would later become another source of painful hindsight. After a disappearance, every shared memory becomes precious. Ordinary afternoons suddenly feel irreplaceable. Casual conversations are replayed endlessly, not because they contained obvious clues, but because they represent the final opportunities to understand someone who is no longer there. Imagine remembering a joke you once laughed at together. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Years later, it becomes something priceless because it captures a version of that person untouched by tragedy. That is the quiet cruelty of missing person cases. They transform ordinary memories into irreplaceable treasures. As Ruth moved through her teenage years, she stood at the threshold separating childhood from adulthood. Like millions of young people before and after her, she was beginning to imagine a future that extended far beyond classrooms and homework. The exact details of those ambitions remain private, and it would be irresponsible to invent them. What can be said is far simpler. She had a future. Whether that future involved university, work, travel, music, literature, or dreams she never shared publicly, it existed. 16-year-olds naturally imagine tomorrow. That is what makes their disappearance so profoundly heartbreaking. It interrupts not only the present but every possibility that might have followed. Every year after 1995 became another year Ruth never had the chance to experience. Another birthday uncelebrated. Another season unseen. Another page left unwritten. As investigators would later search for explanations, they often returned to one central question. Who was Ruth Wilson? Not merely as a missing person, but as a human being. Because understanding the life she was living before November 27th offered the best chance of understanding the decisions she made when that day finally arrived. And those decisions, though seemingly ordinary at first, would soon become some of the most scrutinized actions in the history of the case. One of the most difficult aspects of understanding any victim is accepting that no single description can ever fully capture who they were. Human beings do not exist as collections of facts. They exist in contradictions. A person can be confident in one moment and uncertain in the next. They can enjoy solitude while deeply valuing friendship. They can appear calm on the outside while carrying questions they have never shared with another soul. Ruth Wilson was no exception. Because she disappeared so young, much of what survives publicly about her life comes through the memories of others. Friends, relatives, investigators, and journalists have all attempted, in different ways, to describe the girl they remembered. Yet memory is like light passing through stained glass. Each person sees the same figure from a different angle. No single perspective is complete, but together they begin to reveal the outline of a real human being. By all publicly available accounts, Ruth was thoughtful. That word appears simple. It is anything but. Thoughtful people often notice details others overlook. They observe conversations as carefully as they participate in them. They spend time reflecting after disagreements instead of immediately moving on. They are often drawn toward books, music, and ideas because those things provide space for questions that everyday life rarely answers. Thoughtfulness can be a gift. It can also become a burden. The more deeply someone reflects on the world, the more difficult it sometimes becomes to ignore its contradictions. Why do people hide the truth? Why do families keep secrets? Why do painful things happen without explanation? Questions like these rarely have satisfying answers. For a teenager standing on the edge of adulthood, they can become impossible to silence. There is an important distinction between intelligence and emotional certainty. Society often assumes that bright young people naturally possess resilience. Adults praise academic ability, curiosity, and maturity, believing those qualities somehow protect children from emotional hardship. Reality is rarely so kind. Intelligence does not shield anyone from grief. It does not prevent confusion. It does not stop loneliness from finding its way into quiet moments. Sometimes it has the opposite effect. The more questions a person asks, the more they become aware of how many answers remain beyond reach. That awareness appears again and again in stories involving adolescents who find themselves confronting difficult family histories. As children, they accept the world largely as it is presented to them. As teenagers, they begin testing those explanations against their own experiences. They notice inconsistencies. They revisit old memories with new understanding. They ask questions that once seemed forbidden. It is part of growing up. But growth is rarely comfortable. For Ruth, Learning the truth about her mother's death appears to have changed more than one fact about her childhood. It may have altered the emotional landscape through which she understood her family. Again, we cannot know precisely how she interpreted that revelation. Any attempt to describe her private thoughts as fact would go beyond the available evidence. What we can understand is that adolescence is already a time when trust, identity, and belonging are constantly being renegotiated. Discovering a long-hidden family secret during that period can complicate all three. It is easy, with hindsight, to imagine that everyone around Ruth must have noticed some dramatic change. The historical record suggests otherwise. There is no widely documented account of teachers raising urgent concerns in the days before her disappearance. There is no publicly confirmed evidence that classmates believed she was about to vanish. Life, from the outside, continued to look remarkably ordinary. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden inside so many unsolved disappearances. The deepest struggles are often invisible. There is another quality frequently overlooked when discussing teenagers. Adaptability. Young people become astonishingly skilled at continuing daily routines even while carrying emotional weight that would overwhelm many adults. They attend lessons, complete assignments, exchange jokes with friends, and return home each evening despite privately wrestling with questions that remain unresolved. Adults watching from the outside often mistake routine for stability. Routine can simply be routine. It does not necessarily reveal what someone feels after the school day ends. This is why investigators are often cautious when interpreting behavior before a disappearance. Human actions rarely possess only one explanation. Spending time alone may indicate a desire for reflection, or it may simply mean someone enjoys quiet. Borrowing books from a library may represent ordinary study or nothing more than a lifelong habit. Choosing not to discuss emotions openly may reflect distress or merely personality. Context matters. Evidence matters. Assumptions do not. As Ruth's story became more widely known, many people searched desperately for signs that could explain what happened. Some focused on her emotional life. Others emphasized the practical decisions she made during her final day. A few attempted to combine both into a single narrative that explained everything. No narrative has ever succeeded. Because Ruth herself remains the one voice missing from every conversation. She cannot tell us why she visited certain places. She cannot explain what she hoped to accomplish. She cannot confirm or reject the countless theories that have emerged over the decades. Her silence has allowed speculation to flourish. It has also reminded investigators of the importance of restraint. Sometimes admitting what we do not know is the most honest conclusion available. Despite the unanswered questions, one truth remains remarkably clear. Ruth was more than the circumstances of her disappearance. She was someone's daughter. Someone's classmate. Someone's friend. A young woman whose life contained ordinary routines, familiar faces, favorite places, private worries, and quiet hopes. Those ordinary elements deserve attention because they anchor the story in reality. Without them, the case becomes little more than an intellectual puzzle. True crime should never lose sight of the human being at its center. Imagine walking through Ruth's school during those final weeks. Students move between classrooms carrying books beneath their arms. Teachers erase chalkboards before beginning another lesson. Laughter echoes briefly down the corridors before disappearing behind closing doors. Outside, autumn air drifts across the playground. Nothing about the scene suggests that one student will soon become the subject of one of Britain's longest-running missing person investigations. No invisible spotlight follows Ruth through the halls. No music announces approaching tragedy. History has not yet revealed itself. She is simply another teenager among hundreds of others. That image is important because it restores perspective. The mystery had not yet begun. At least, not in the eyes of anyone watching. The ordinary nature of Ruth's life also explains why her disappearance would send such shockwaves through those who knew her. Cases involving individuals already living highly unstable lives sometimes lead observers to search for obvious explanations. Ruth's story resisted that instinct. She was not publicly known as someone immersed in dangerous criminal circles. She was not living a life defined by chaos. Instead, she appeared to be navigating the familiar complexities of adolescence while carrying emotional questions that, though significant, were far from unique. That is precisely what made the case so unsettling. If someone like Ruth could disappear without leaving a clear explanation, could it happen to anyone? The question lingered long after search teams packed away their equipment. Long after newspaper headlines faded. Long after witnesses struggled to remember details from an ordinary Monday that suddenly mattered more than they ever could have imagined. In many ways, Ruth's greatest legacy is not the mystery itself. It is the reminder that every missing person's photograph represents an unfinished future rather than merely an unsolved investigation. When we look at the images released by police, we see a 16-year-old whose expression remains forever fixed in time. We know everything that happened after those photographs were taken, yet she knew none of it. She could not have imagined decades of speculation, renewed investigations, documentaries, newspaper features, or strangers across the world discussing her story. She was simply living her life. One day at a time. Like everyone else. And then came Monday, November 27, 1995. A day that began with familiar routines. A day that carried no obvious warning. A day that would quietly transform Ruth Wilson from an ordinary schoolgirl into one of the most enduring mysteries in modern British criminal history. The ordinary life we have come to know was about to intersect with an extraordinary sequence of events. And once that morning began, nothing would ever be the same again. By the time Ruth Wilson reached the age of 16, she was standing at a complicated crossroads. She was no longer a child who simply accepted the world as adults presented it, but she was not yet an adult with complete independence over her own life. Like many teenagers, she existed in that uncertain space between dependence and freedom, between wanting to be understood and wanting to be left alone. It is a stage of life defined by transition. The person you were yesterday begins to disappear before you fully understand the person you are becoming tomorrow. For Ruth, that transition appears to have carried an additional emotional weight. The discovery surrounding her mother's death was not simply a piece of information about the past. It was a change to the story she had been carrying about herself. Family history is never just history. It becomes part of identity. The people who came before us shape the way we understand where we belong, what we inherit, and what we fear repeating. When that history changes, the impact can reach far beyond the original event. A child who learns that a parent died may grieve. A teenager who learns that the circumstances were different may also question trust. Those emotions can exist together. Grief, confusion, anger, love, loss. None of them cancel the others. And that complexity is important when looking at Ruth's final months. It would be easy to create a simple story in which one painful revelation explains everything that happened afterward. Human beings naturally search for a single cause because a single cause feels manageable. If we can identify one moment when everything changed, then the world feels less random. But real lives rarely work that way. People are shaped by hundreds of experiences. A conversation. A memory. A disappointment. A friendship. A fear. A hope. A question that remains unanswered. All of these things exist together, sometimes quietly influencing decisions in ways even the person making them does not fully understand. That is especially true during adolescence. Teenagers are often experiencing the world with extraordinary intensity. Moments that adults might dismiss as temporary can feel overwhelming because teenagers are still building emotional tools and personal perspectives. Their understanding of themselves is still developing. The future feels both limitless and frightening. Every door seems possible, but every choice carries uncertainty. At 16, Ruth was close enough to adulthood to imagine independence. But still young enough to feel the need for security. That tension appears repeatedly in accounts of teenagers facing difficult circumstances. The desire to escape does not always mean the desire to disappear. Wanting change does not always mean wanting to leave everything behind. Feeling misunderstood does not always mean there is no love. These distinctions matter because Ruth's disappearance has often been examined through the question of whether she intended to leave voluntarily. Some have suggested she may have wanted to begin a different life. Others believe the circumstances surrounding her emotional state point toward a darker outcome. But the truth is that wanting distance from a difficult situation and intending never to be found are two very different things. Without Ruth's own words, certainty remains impossible. And that absence of certainty is perhaps the most painful element of this entire case. She cannot clarify what she meant. She cannot explain what she felt. She cannot tell investigators whether the final choices of her life were carefully considered or made during a moment of overwhelming emotion. The person who knew the answer best is the person no one has been able to find. Those who study missing person cases often talk about the importance of understanding a victim's life before. This does not mean searching for blame. It does not mean attempting to justify what happened. It means recognizing that a disappearance is not the beginning of a person's story. It is a chapter inside a much larger one. Ruth had 16 years before the world knew her name. 16 years filled with moments that will never appear in a police timeline. The first time she laughed at a joke that only she found funny. The books that stayed with her long after she finished reading them. The songs that carried memories. The conversations that seemed ordinary but mattered. The small habits that family members noticed without realizing they were collecting memories. Those details are impossible to recover completely now. But they are what make her real. A person is not defined only by the last day anyone saw them. Yet that is the tragedy of many missing person cases. The final moments become so powerful that they overshadow everything that came before. The public remembers the location where someone vanished, the date on the calendar, the unanswered questions. The person themselves slowly becomes hidden behind the event. Ruth's story deserves the opposite. Before Box Hill, before the investigation, before theories and unanswered questions, there was a teenager who existed in a world that was not defined by disappearance. She had relationships. She had interests. She had thoughts that belonged only to her. She had a future that no one expected would suddenly stop. One of the most heartbreaking parts of Ruth's disappearance is imagining the future moments that never arrived. The conversations she never had. The experiences she never reached. The person she might have become. Every missing young person carries not only the pain of absence but the loss of possibility. A 16-year-old represents an unfinished story. There are still countless pages ahead. The world has not yet seen the full person they might become. Perhaps that is why cases like Ruth's remain so emotionally powerful decades later. They remind us that disappearance is not only about what happened on one particular day. It is also about everything that should have happened afterward. The years that followed. The milestones missed. The ordinary moments that families never got to share. By the time November 1995 approached its final week, Ruth was still living inside that unfinished future. She was still a teenager with decisions ahead of her, experiences waiting for her, and questions she was still trying to answer. No one around her knew that the timeline of her life was about to become divided. Before. And after. Before the rain. Before the taxi ride. Before the hillside. Before the silence. The tragedy of missing person cases is that the moment of disappearance often looks completely ordinary while it is happening. The people involved do not know they are standing at the edge of history. They do not know a final conversation is final. They do not know a routine journey will later become a mystery examined for decades. The world keeps moving because no one knows it has changed yet. That was true for Ruth. On the morning of November 27, 1995, she was still simply Ruth Wilson. A 16-year-old girl preparing to move through another day. A girl with a past she was trying to understand. A girl with questions that may have felt impossible to answer. A girl whose future remained unwritten. And then, sometime during that day, the ordinary rhythm of her life began to break apart. The decisions she made. The places she visited. The people who saw her. The final confirmed moments of her journey. All of them would later become pieces of an investigation that continues to resist resolution. But before investigators searched for answers, before the world searched for Ruth, there was one final ordinary day. And it began like any other. Until it didn't. Monday, November 27, 1995, began without any sign that it would become one of the most examined days in Surrey's history. There was no dramatic warning. No sudden event that would make the people around Ruth stop and realize something terrible was unfolding. The morning arrived quietly, like countless other late autumn mornings before it. The kind of morning where darkness still lingers even after people wake up. Where the air feels damp and cold against the skin. Where the first sounds of the day come not from birdsong, but from car engines starting, doors closing, and footsteps moving quickly across wet pavements. For most people in Surrey, it was simply another Monday. Children prepared for school. Adults went to work. Buses followed their usual routes. Shops opened their doors. The countryside remained peaceful beneath the heavy November sky. But somewhere within that ordinary routine, Ruth Wilson was beginning the final known journey of her life. The details of that morning remain incomplete. Like many missing person investigations, there are gaps that no amount of reconstruction can fully fill. Investigators can establish certain movements. They can identify locations she visited. They can speak to witnesses who crossed her path. But the private moments, the thoughts behind her decisions, the emotions that guided her actions remain hidden. And that is what makes this case so difficult. The physical journey can be traced. The emotional journey cannot. Ruth was 16 years old. She was expected to follow the familiar pattern of a school day. Like many teenagers, her morning likely involved the small routines that rarely seem important at the time. Preparing to leave the house. Gathering belongings. Moving through a schedule that had been repeated countless times before. Yet at some point that morning, something changed. Ruth did not arrive at school as expected. That single fact would later become one of the first major turning points in the investigation. A teenager missing a day of school does not always immediately signal danger. Students skip lessons. They become ill. They change plans. They spend time elsewhere for reasons that may seem insignificant. In 1995, before smartphones and constant digital contact, a person could move through several hours without anyone immediately knowing where they were. But Ruth was not simply absent. She had begun a sequence of actions that would only make sense when viewed together afterward. At the time, each individual decision appeared ordinary. Together, they created a mystery. Somewhere after leaving home, Ruth traveled to the town of Dorking. Dorking was not a place of dramatic city streets or overwhelming crowds. It was a market town surrounded by the natural beauty of Surrey, a place where old buildings, independent shops, and narrow roads created an atmosphere far removed from the noise of London. It was the kind of town where a person could walk through the streets without attracting attention. That detail would later become important. Because disappearances often occur in spaces that feel safe. Not abandoned locations. Not obviously dangerous environments. But ordinary places where people believe nothing unusual is happening. Ruth's movements in Dorking became some of the last confirmed pieces of her timeline. One of the most unusual details from that day involved a visit to arrange flowers. Ruth ordered a bouquet to be delivered to her stepmother, but with a specific instruction: the flowers were not to arrive immediately. They were scheduled for delivery several days later. To anyone encountering that information after the disappearance, the detail feels significant. Why choose flowers? Why send them for a future date? Was it a simple gesture? A personal message? A goodbye? The difficulty is that the same action can carry completely different meanings depending on what happened afterward. If Ruth had returned home normally, nobody would have considered the bouquet unusual. It would simply have been remembered as a thoughtful gesture. But because she vanished, the act became surrounded by questions. Human beings naturally search for hidden messages after tragedy. We look backward and try to find intention. We ask whether someone was leaving clues. Whether they were preparing others. Whether they were silently saying goodbye. Sometimes those interpretations are correct. Sometimes they are not. The truth is that without Ruth's explanation, the meaning of the flowers remains uncertain. Another confirmed part of Ruth's day involved spending time at the library. Again, on its own, the detail is not remarkable. A teenager visiting a library is exactly the kind of behavior many people would consider completely normal. But in the context of a disappearance, ordinary actions become investigative landmarks. The library became another timestamp in Ruth's final known movements. A place where she was still visible. Still part of the world. Still moving through familiar surroundings. It is difficult to imagine what those hours looked like from Ruth's perspective. Did she walk through Dorking feeling calm? Was she nervous? Was she determined? Was she simply passing time? Did she know where she was going next? These are the questions that have surrounded the case for decades. The most frustrating mysteries are often not built from a lack of information. They are built from information that almost but not quite answers the question. Investigators know where Ruth went. They know when she went there. They know what some witnesses saw. But the meaning behind those actions remains locked away. As the afternoon moved forward, daylight began fading earlier, as it always does in late November. The sky over Surrey would have been heavy with winter clouds. The temperature would have dropped. Rain became a persistent presence, turning roads dark and reflective. Then came the decision that would define the final confirmed moments of Ruth Wilson's known life. She took a taxi. Her destination was Box Hill. The journey from Dorking toward Box Hill is not a long one, but the psychological distance represented by that trip has become enormous. For investigators, it marked the movement from a populated town into an area where fewer people would have been present. Box Hill itself was not a threatening place. That is an important distinction. It was not some hidden location chosen only by criminals. It was a well-known natural area, famous for its views, walking paths, and countryside scenery. During daylight hours, people visited to enjoy the landscape. Cyclists traveled the roads. Families walked the trails. But by late afternoon in November, especially in poor weather, the atmosphere changed. The number of visitors decreased. The paths became quieter. The countryside became more isolated. The same beauty that attracted visitors could also create a sense of distance from the outside world. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, Ruth arrived at Box Hill. The taxi driver's account would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. According to his statement, Ruth exited the vehicle. He watched as she remained standing there after the taxi began to leave. She did not immediately walk away. She did not appear to follow a visible path. She simply stood there. Alone. In the rain. That final image has remained at the center of the mystery. Because it creates the most haunting question of all. What was Ruth waiting for? Was she waiting for a person? Was she waiting for a moment? Was she gathering the courage to do something? Or was she simply deciding where to go next? The taxi driver could not know. No witness could know. From his perspective, he was completing an ordinary journey. He dropped off a passenger. He continued with his day. Only later would that brief encounter become the last confirmed sighting of a 16-year-old girl whose disappearance would remain unsolved for decades. The taxi disappeared down the road. The rain continued falling. And somewhere beyond that moment, Ruth Wilson stepped into the unknown. That is where certainty ends. Everything afterward becomes a series of possibilities. A search. A mystery. A collection of unanswered questions. But for that brief moment, before the world realized she was missing, Ruth was still there. Standing on Box Hill. 16 years old. Alone in the November rain. And waiting for whatever came next. The most haunting moments in any disappearance are rarely the dramatic ones. They are the quiet seconds that nobody recognized as important until it was already too late. A door closing. A final conversation. A person turning a corner. A vehicle disappearing down a road. At the time, these moments seem ordinary because there is no reason to believe they are anything else. The people involved are not actors in a tragedy. They are simply living their lives, unaware that a single interaction will later be examined repeatedly by investigators searching for answers. For Ruth Wilson, that moment belonged to a taxi driver on a rainy November afternoon. A man who believed he was completing another routine journey. A driver transporting a teenage passenger from one location to another. A person who had no reason to memorize every detail. Until those details became the last known pieces of a missing girl's story. The taxi ride to Box Hill was brief, but its importance grew larger with every passing year. Investigators would eventually return to that journey again and again because it represented the final confirmed movement of Ruth before she disappeared. Every missing person case contains a moment when the known world ends. For Ruth, it happened when the taxi pulled away. Before that moment, investigators had locations, witnesses, and a sequence of movements. After that moment, they had questions. The driver's description created an image that has remained painfully vivid. Ruth arrived at Box Hill and stepped out of the vehicle. The weather was unpleasant. Rain fell over the countryside. The afternoon light was already fading. Yet instead of immediately walking away, she remained where she was. Standing still. Waiting. That single detail has generated endless speculation. A person standing alone in the rain can mean many things. They could be lost in thought. They could be deciding which direction to take. They could be waiting for someone. They could be overwhelmed by emotion. They could simply be pausing before continuing. The human mind naturally wants to assign meaning. We look at that final image and feel that it must contain an answer. Surely, we think, someone standing alone in those circumstances must have been making a significant decision. But the truth is more complicated. A moment can be important without revealing its meaning. That is one of the cruelest aspects of unresolved cases. The evidence exists. The explanation does not. Imagine the scene from Ruth's perspective. The taxi door closes. The sound of the engine grows louder. The vehicle begins moving away. The road stretches behind her, disappearing into the wet landscape. Rain touches her hair and clothing. The familiar warmth of the taxi is gone. The world becomes quieter. Ahead lies Box Hill, the open countryside, the trees, the paths, the unknown. What happened inside Ruth's mind during those seconds? Was she certain about her next step? Was she reconsidering? Was she waiting for someone who never arrived? Was she simply taking a moment before walking? No one knows. And that silence has become the defining feature of the case. One of the greatest challenges investigators face in disappearances is that the final known sighting often creates more questions than answers. A witness can confirm where someone was, but rarely why they were there. They can describe movements but not motivations. They can provide a photograph of a moment, but not the thoughts behind it. The taxi driver could tell police what he saw. He could not tell them what Ruth intended. That distinction would become crucial. As the hours passed after Ruth disappeared, her family had no reason to immediately understand the significance of those moments. There was no alarm raised at the exact instant she left the taxi. No one watching from a distance realized they had witnessed something historic. The world continued normally. Cars continued along Surrey roads. People continued walking through Dorking. Families returned home. Dinner was prepared. Television programs aired that evening. Ordinary life continued. But somewhere, a 16-year-old girl had failed to return. And slowly, concern began replacing routine. The first hours after someone goes missing are often filled with uncertainty. Families initially search for harmless explanations. Perhaps she stayed with a friend. Perhaps plans changed. Perhaps she needed time alone. Perhaps she would walk through the door any moment and explain everything. Hope often arrives before fear. That is a natural human response. The mind protects itself from the possibility of the worst outcome by creating ordinary explanations first. But as time passes, those explanations begin to weaken. A missed phone call becomes concerning. An unanswered message becomes frightening. A delayed return becomes something impossible to ignore. For Ruth's family, the absence became increasingly difficult to explain. She had not simply been late. She had vanished. And unlike many disappearances where the person leaves behind obvious clues, Ruth's final movements created a puzzle filled with contradictions. She had not disappeared randomly. She had made choices. She had traveled to specific locations. She had arranged the delivery of flowers. She had spent time in the library. She had taken a taxi to Box Hill. Those actions suggested intention. But intention toward what? That question would become the foundation of the investigation. When detectives examined Ruth's final day, they were confronted with a timeline that seemed carefully constructed yet impossible to interpret. It appeared as though she had followed a series of deliberate steps, but the purpose behind those steps remained hidden. Was she planning to leave? Was she meeting someone? Was she trying to create a final memory? Was she searching for a place where she could think? Every possibility opened another door. Every door led to more uncertainty. This is why the case has remained so difficult. A person who vanishes accidentally often leaves chaos behind. A person who plans to disappear often leaves signs of preparation. A person who becomes the victim of a crime may leave evidence of another person's involvement. Ruth's disappearance sits uncomfortably between these possibilities. There are elements that suggest planning. There are elements that suggest vulnerability. There are elements that suggest something may have happened beyond her control. But none are strong enough to close the case. The landscape around Box Hill also added another layer of difficulty. A rural area can be both open and concealed at the same time. From one viewpoint, the countryside seems exposed. Fields stretch outward. Roads are visible. The horizon appears endless. But move a short distance into woodland, and the environment changes completely. Trees block sight lines. Paths divide. Sounds become unreliable. A person can disappear from view quickly. The same natural beauty that attracts visitors can also make searching incredibly challenging. Especially in poor weather. Especially as darkness approaches. Especially when investigators do not know exactly what they are looking for. Did Ruth walk away from the road? Did she enter the woodland? Did she meet someone nearby? Did she leave the area entirely? Every question depended on another question that had no answer. The absence of witnesses became one of the most frustrating aspects of the case. Somewhere between the taxi leaving and the moment Ruth was reported missing, something happened. That statement is undeniable. But what happened remains unknown. There was a period of time, a gap measured not in years but in minutes and hours, where the truth exists. A period when Ruth was still alive and moving through the world. A period that nobody has been able to reconstruct. Those missing moments became the center of everything that followed. Because if investigators could understand those final minutes, they might finally understand the disappearance itself. But time does not preserve every moment. Some moments vanish along with the people who lived them. And for Ruth Wilson, the final confirmed image remains unchanged. A teenage girl. A quiet hillside. A rainy afternoon. A taxi driving away. Then silence. The investigation would soon begin searching that silence for answers. But first, investigators had to confront the most urgent question of all. Where was Ruth Wilson? Ban Dia Noi. The first hours after a person disappears are unlike any other period in an investigation. They exist in a strange space between ordinary life and crisis. Families do not immediately know which emotions they are supposed to feel. Fear competes with hope. Logic battles against imagination. Every possible explanation appears at once, and the mind desperately chooses the least frightening one. Maybe she is with someone. Maybe she just needs time. Maybe there is a simple explanation. Those thoughts are not denial. They are love trying to protect itself. For Ruth Wilson's family, the reality of her disappearance would not arrive all at once. It would emerge gradually, through small details that refused to fit together. A 16-year-old girl had left home. She had not followed the expected routine. She had not returned. She had not contacted anyone to explain where she was. At first, the situation might have seemed like a teenager needing space. But as time continued, the possibility of something more serious became impossible to ignore. The frightening thing about missing person cases is how quickly an ordinary absence transforms into an emergency. A person can be present in the world one moment and unreachable the next. The distance between those two realities can be only a few hours. For families, those hours feel endless. The mind begins searching through every possible explanation. A friend's house. A relative's home. A place where someone goes to be alone. A mistake. A misunderstanding. Anything except the possibility that something terrible has happened. Because the human mind struggles to accept sudden uncertainty. We are built to create stories. When information is missing, we fill the gaps. But in Ruth's case, the gaps were exactly where the mystery existed. There was no confirmed explanation waiting to be discovered. Only a series of movements leading to a final location. The last confirmed sighting at Box Hill became the point where concern transformed into a search for answers. Investigators would later examine Ruth's actions throughout the day, looking for patterns. They would ask questions that seemed simple but carried enormous weight. Why did she go to Dorking? Why did she spend time at the library? Why did she arrange flowers to be delivered later? Why did she choose Box Hill? Each question was reasonable. Each question was necessary. But none provided a complete answer. The difficulty was that Ruth's final day contained something unusual for investigators. It contained purpose without explanation. A person wandering aimlessly leaves a different kind of trail from someone following a plan. Ruth's movements suggested she knew where she wanted to go. But the reason remained hidden. That distinction shaped the entire investigation. If she had simply disappeared without a trace from an unknown location, investigators would have approached the case differently. But Ruth had left behind a sequence of choices. Each choice appeared meaningful. Each one invited interpretation. And interpretation, especially in missing person cases, can be dangerous. A flower delivery can be a goodbye. Or it can simply be kindness. A library visit can be preparation. Or it can simply be a library visit. A journey to a quiet location can be a final decision. Or it can be a person seeking time alone. The same action can tell completely different stories depending on what came next. And nobody knew what came next. That was the central tragedy. Ruth's final known hours were filled with moments that could be interpreted in multiple ways, but the one person capable of explaining them was missing. The investigation had to move forward without the voice that mattered most. As authorities began treating the disappearance seriously, attention naturally focused on Box Hill. The location represented both hope and fear. Hope, because if Ruth was still nearby, perhaps she could be found quickly. Fear, because the landscape offered countless places where answers could disappear. The search environment was challenging. Late November in Surrey is a difficult time for outdoor searches. The days are short. Weather conditions are unpredictable. Rain changes the terrain. Dense woodland can hide objects only a short distance from paths. Even experienced search teams face difficulties when they do not know exactly what they are looking for. Every missing person search begins with uncertainty. But uncertainty becomes far more difficult when there is no clear direction. Did investigators need to search for someone who was lost? Someone who left voluntarily? Someone who had encountered another person? Someone who had suffered an accident? Every possibility required different assumptions. Every assumption influenced where they looked. And every hour that passed increased the pressure. For Ruth's family, the waiting must have been unbearable. The early stages of a disappearance create a painful contradiction. People want immediate answers. But answers require time. Families want action. But action requires information. Investigators want certainty. But certainty requires evidence. And evidence does not always appear simply because people need it. In the absence of answers, people begin creating possibilities. That happened with Ruth's case as well. Almost immediately, questions emerged. Had she planned to leave? Had someone persuaded her to go to Box Hill? Had she arranged to meet someone there? Had something unexpected happened after the taxi left? These questions were not unusual. They were exactly the questions investigators themselves had to consider. But every question also carried emotional consequences. Because behind every theory was a real person. A daughter. A friend. A teenager whose future had suddenly become uncertain. This is where missing person investigations become especially difficult. The search for truth is necessary, but the process can sometimes turn a person's private struggles into public speculation. Every possibility becomes examined. Every relationship becomes questioned. Every personal difficulty becomes analyzed. The victim's life becomes evidence. That is an uncomfortable reality. Yet investigators must consider everything. Not because every detail suggests wrongdoing, but because every detail might matter. In Ruth's case, the circumstances before her disappearance became especially important. Her emotional state, her family history, and her final decisions all became part of the larger picture. But none of them, individually, solved the mystery. They only created a more complicated portrait. The girl who disappeared was not a simple story. She was a teenager carrying personal experiences that others could only partially understand. She was someone who had recently confronted painful truths. She was someone who had expressed thoughts about leaving home. She was someone who, on the final day anyone could confirm seeing her, made a series of deliberate movements toward a location where she was ultimately lost from view. Every fact mattered. But facts alone were not enough. They needed context. And context was exactly what investigators were missing. Because the most important witness was gone. Ruth. As night settled over Surrey that evening, the reality of what had happened became clearer. A girl had left. A girl had not returned. A girl had last been seen standing alone in the rain at Box Hill. And somewhere beyond that final sighting was a truth no one had yet discovered. The following days would bring searches, interviews, and a growing national awareness of the case. The quiet countryside would become the center of intense attention. The ordinary places Ruth had visited would become locations examined for clues. The people who had seen her briefly would become witnesses to a story they never expected to be part of. And the question that began as a family's desperate concern would become a question asked by thousands. Where did Ruth Wilson go? The search for that answer was about to begin. The first moments after a person is reported missing are filled with movement. Phone calls are made. Names are written down. Questions are repeated. People search places that seem obvious before moving toward places that seem impossible. Every decision carries urgency because time has a different meaning when someone may be in danger. The first hours can determine whether a missing person is found safely or whether a mystery begins to grow. For Ruth Wilson, those first hours marked the beginning of one of Surrey's most challenging missing person investigations. A 16-year-old girl had disappeared. There was a confirmed last sighting. There was a location. But there was no explanation. And sometimes, a location without an explanation can be more frightening than having no information at all. Because Box Hill was not simply a place on a map. It was the last known point where Ruth existed within the visible world. Everything before it could be reconstructed. Everything after it became uncertainty. Investigators knew Ruth had traveled there. They knew she had exited the taxi. They knew she had been seen standing alone. But what happened after the vehicle disappeared down the road remained completely unknown. That single unanswered question shaped everything that followed. The search began with the hope that Ruth was still nearby. That hope is always present at the beginning of a missing person investigation. Every officer arriving at the scene, every volunteer joining the search, every family member waiting for news wants to believe the same thing. That the person will be found. That the next phone call will bring relief. That the uncertainty will end quickly. No one begins a search believing they are looking for a mystery that will last decades. At the start, investigators work with possibilities, not conclusions. Ruth might have become lost. She might have decided to walk elsewhere. She might have met someone. She might have needed help. She might have been somewhere completely unexpected. Every possibility had to be considered. The challenge was that each possibility required searching a different kind of place. A person who is lost may remain close to where they were last seen. A person who intentionally leaves may travel far beyond the expected search area. A person who encounters danger may leave behind evidence pointing toward another individual. Investigators had to consider all of these scenarios without knowing which direction the truth had taken. The surrounding landscape made the situation even more difficult. Box Hill is a place defined by contrast. During the day, it can feel open and welcoming. Visitors come for the views, the walking trails, and the peaceful countryside atmosphere. The landscape stretches across Surrey in a way that makes the world appear calm and endless. But the same environment changes dramatically under poor weather and fading daylight. The countryside becomes quieter. Paths become less obvious. Distances become difficult to judge. A person can move from visibility into isolation within moments. For search teams, the challenge was not simply finding Ruth. It was understanding where she might have gone. Every path became a possibility. Every wooded area had to be considered. Every roadside became important. The search area expanded because the last confirmed sighting did not provide a clear direction. A witness had seen Ruth. But the witness had not seen where she went afterward. That difference would define the investigation. Search teams began examining the area around Box Hill, looking for anything that could explain Ruth's movements. The work was physically demanding and emotionally difficult. A missing person search is not like searching for a lost object. Every person involved knows what they are looking for. A human being. Someone's daughter. Someone's friend. Someone who had a life before becoming the subject of a search. That awareness changes everything. A discarded piece of clothing is not just an object. A footprint is not just a mark. A personal belonging is not just evidence. Every discovery carries the possibility of hope or heartbreak. Investigators had to move carefully, documenting what they found while avoiding assumptions. The danger in any disappearance case is that people want clues to reveal themselves immediately. They want the landscape to provide an answer. But real investigations rarely work that way. Evidence is often quiet. It does not announce its importance. A small detail may mean everything. Or nothing. The search for Ruth would involve extensive efforts, including specialist resources and assistance from members of the community. Police searched the surrounding area using available technology and trained personnel. Dogs were used to examine locations. Helicopter support and thermal imaging capabilities were also part of the search efforts. The scale of the operation reflected the seriousness of the situation. Ruth was young. She had vanished from a known location. And there was no confirmed reason why. Yet despite the effort, the search did not produce the discovery everyone hoped for. No clear trail. No confirmed sighting after Box Hill. No evidence that could explain what had happened. Only absence. And absence is one of the hardest things for investigators to confront. Because absence provides no direction. A crime scene gives investigators something to study. A damaged object. A physical trace. A sequence of events that can be reconstructed. A disappearance can leave behind almost nothing. The empty space itself becomes the mystery. As days passed, the emotional reality of the situation changed. The initial hope that Ruth would simply return began competing with the fear that something more serious had occurred. For her family, every passing hour brought another wave of uncertainty. There is a particular cruelty in waiting for news about a missing person. The mind constantly moves between hope and fear. One moment imagining a safe return. The next imagining every possible tragedy. Neither feeling can completely defeat the other. Hope remains because love demands it. Fear remains because reality allows it. And in the middle sits uncertainty. For investigators, the challenge became reconstructing Ruth's final movements in greater detail. The taxi ride to Box Hill became central. The journey through Dorking became important. The flowers. The library. The timing. Each detail was examined. Each witness statement reviewed. The goal was simple. Find the missing moment. Find the point where Ruth's path changed. Find the event that separated the known from the unknown. But the more investigators examined the timeline, the more complicated the picture became. Because Ruth's final day did not look random. It looked deliberate. Yet deliberate actions do not automatically reveal intent. A person can plan a journey without planning an ending. A person can seek solitude without wanting to disappear. A person can make arrangements without leaving a message. The investigation was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. Ruth had left behind actions, but not answers. That distinction would follow the case for years. The search at Box Hill eventually became the first major chapter in an investigation defined by unanswered questions. Officers had searched the places where they believed Ruth might be found. They had followed the available information. They had examined the final confirmed location. But Ruth was not there. And that changed the nature of the case. The question was no longer simply, "Where is she?" It became, "What happened after she left the taxi?" That question would remain at the center of every future investigation. Because somewhere between the moment Ruth stepped onto Box Hill and the moment the search began, something happened. A person saw something. A decision was made. A path was taken. A moment passed. And whatever happened in that invisible space became the mystery that investigators would spend decades trying to solve. The search had begun with hope. But it was becoming something else. A search for a missing girl. A search for evidence. A search for the truth.